In the vast expanse of Auschwitz-Birkenau, beyond the fences and the watchtowers, beyond the arrival ramps and the long lines of people, there existed another world. One that was quieter, more enclosed, and yet just as defining of life inside the camp. The barracks. These wooden and brick structures were not simply shelters. They were spaces where thousands of individuals were brought together, confined within walls that held not just bodies, but thoughts, memories, and the silent weight of daily existence. From the outside, they appeared uniform. Rows upon rows of buildings stretching across the camp. But inside, each barrack carried its own atmosphere, shaped by overcrowding, routine, and the constant presence of others living side by side. As day turned to night, and night to day again, these barracks became the center of a different kind of experience. One that unfolded away from the visible structure of the camp's operations. Here, the rhythm of life slowed, yet never fully stopped. People returned after long hours of labor, finding what little space they could, adjusting to conditions that required constant adaptation. But the barracks were more than just physical spaces. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to In&Out Nazi Germany, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Every story, every memory, and every place matters. And together we keep history alive. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, Segment 1. Entering the barracks, the first experience of the interior. As individuals moved deeper into the vast and structured environment of Birkenau, leaving behind the open spaces of arrival areas and the wider paths that connected different sections of the camp, they eventually encountered the barracks, long rows of buildings that stretched across the landscape with a uniform appearance that, from a distance, seemed almost orderly, yet as one approached closer, the reality of these structures began to reveal itself in more detail. And for those entering for the first time, this moment marked a significant transition, not just in physical location, but in the nature of their experience within the camp, as the barracks represented a shift from movement to containment, from open space to enclosed living, and as individuals crossed the threshold into these buildings, the change in atmosphere was immediate, shaped by the contrast between the outside environment and the interior space, where light was more limited, air felt heavier, and the presence of many people within a confined area became instantly apparent, and within this interior, the structure of the barack itself began to take form in the perception of those entering, as rows of wooden or brick frameworks defined the space, with tiers of sleeping platforms arranged in a way that maximized capacity rather than comfort, creating an environment where space was shared and personal boundaries were minimal. And as individuals took in their surroundings, they were not only observing the physical layout, but also the conditions that came with it, the density of occupancy, the arrangement of bodies and belongings, and the overall sense that this was a place designed to hold many within limited confines. And within this initial experience, there was often a moment of adjustment, as the mind processed the new environment and began to understand how life would be lived within these walls and formity. This understanding came not through explanation, but through observation as they watched how others moved, where they positioned themselves, and how they navigated the shared space. And as this process unfolded, the barack began to shift from an unfamiliar structure to a lived environment, one that would shape daily life in ways that extended far beyond its physical form. And within this transition, the sensory experience of the barack played a significant role, as the sounds within the space, the movement of people, the subtle shifts in light and shadow, all contributed to the overall perception of the environment, creating a setting that was both active and confined, where every action was influenced by the presence of others and the limitations of space. And as individuals settled into this new reality, the barack became more than just a place off shelter. It became a central part of their experience within the camp, shaping how they rested, how they interacted, and how they understood their daily lives. And in this way, the first entry into the barracks marked the beginning of a new phase, one defined by shared existence, adaptation, and the gradual understanding of what it meant to live within such an environment. As the initial moments of entering the barracks gave way to a deeper awareness of the environment, individuals began to orient themselves within the space, gradually understanding not only its physical structure but also the patterns of behavior that defined life inside it. And within this process of orientation, observation became essential, as those newly arrived looked toothless who had already adapted to the environment, noting how they organized their limited space, how they moved through the narrow pathways between sleeping platforms, and how they managed the constant presence of others within such close proximity. And as these observations accumulated, they provided a framework for understanding how to exist within the Barak, not through formal instruction, but through the silent transmission of routine and habit. And as individuals began to find their place within this shared environment, the concept of personal space took on a different meaning, as it was no longer defined by physical separation, but by small and often temporary boundaries created within the collective space. And within this setting, the act of settling became an exercise in adaptation, as individuals adjusted their expectations and behaviors to align with the conditions of the Barak, learning how to rest, how to move, and how to coexist within an environment where space was limited and shared by many. And as this adaptation progressed, the Barak itself began to feel less like an unfamiliar structure and more like a defined environment with its own rhythm and patterns, shaped by the daily routines of those who lived within it. And within this emerging rhythm, there was a sense of continuity, as the actions of individuals repeated over time created a predictable flow that defined life inside the Barak, from the moments of return after daily labor to the periods of rest and quiet that followed. And as individuals became more accustomed to this rhythm, their experience of the Barak became more integrated into their overall understanding of life within the camp, as it served not only as a place of physical presence but also as a space where much of their daily experience unfolded. And within this space, the interplay between the individual and the collective remained constant, as each person navigated their own experience while simultaneously being part of a shared environment. And as this dynamic continued to evolve, it reinforced the significance of the Barak as more than just a physical structure, but as a central element of life within Birkenau, where the boundaries between personal and collective experience were closely intertwined, and where the process of adaptation, observation, and coexistence defined the way individuals lived within its walls, marking the beginning of a deeper and more sustained engagement with the environment that would shape their daily lives moving forward. Chapter 1, Segment 2. Space and Arrangement: How Thousands Were Fitted Inside. As individuals spent more time within the Barracks of Birkenau, the initial impressions of the interior gradually gave way to a deeper understanding of how the space itself was organized, and how that organization shaped every aspect of daily life. And within this environment, the arrangement of the Barak was not random, but structured in a way that prioritized capacity above all else, creating a layout where the maximum number of people could be accommodated within a limited area. And as one observed the interior more closely, the defining feature of this arrangement became clear in the rows of wooden sleeping platforms, often built in tiers, extending across the length of the Barak, forming a repetitive pattern that divided the space into sections while still maintaining a sense of openness within the enclosure. And these platforms, while serving as places of rest, also functioned as the primary way in which individuals were organized within the Barak, each level holding multiple people positioned closely together in a way that minimized unused space. And as individuals adapted to this arrangement, they came to understand how their own position within the Barak was determined not by personal choice, but by availability and necessity, finding space where it could be made, often in close proximity to others. And within this configuration, the concept of individual space became fluid, as the boundaries between one person and another were defined not by physical separation, but by shared understanding and the practical realities of the environment. And as the Barak filled with people, the density of the space became one of its most defining characteristics, shaping how individuals moved, rested, and interacted. And within this density, movement itself required awareness, as navigating the narrow pathways between platforms or adjusting position within a shared sleeping area involved a constant negotiation of space, where each action was influenced by the presence of others, and as this pattern continued day after day, the arrangement of the barack became more than just a physical structure. It became a system of organization that influenced behavior, guiding how individuals positioned themselves, how they interacted with their surroundings, and how they adapted to the limitations of the space. And within this system, the repetition of the layout created a sense of uniformity, as each barack followed a similar design, reinforcing the idea that this arrangement was not temporary or improvised, but an integral part of how the camp functioned. And as individuals became more familiar with this environment, they began to understand not only where they were within the space, but also how that space operated, how it was used, and how it shaped the experience of daily life. And in this way, the arrangement of the barracks played a central role in defining what it meant to live within them, creating a setting where thousands were fitted together in a way that emphasized collective existence over individual separation, and where the physical structure of the environment directly influenced the rhythm and reality of life inside. As this understanding of space and arrangement became more deeply integrated into daily experience, individuals began to develop ways of navigating and existing within the limitations of the barack, adapting not only to the physical layout but also to the patterns of shared living that emerged from it. And within this process, the concept of organization extended beyond the structure itself, becoming part of how individuals interacted with the space and with one another, as the need to coexist within close quarters required a level of awareness and adjustment that shaped behavior in subtle but consistent ways. And as individuals settled into their positions within the sleeping platforms, they often developed small routines that helped them manage their space, arranging their belongings, however limited, in ways that allowed for some sense of order within the shared environment. And within these small acts of organization, there was an effort to create a degree of stability, a way of maintaining a sense of personal presence within a space that was otherwise defined by collective occupancy. And as these routines developed, they contributed to the overall rhythm of life within the barack, as individuals learned not only how to exist within the space, but also how to coordinate their actions with those around them, creating a flow-off movement and interaction that, while constrained, was nonetheless structured by shared understanding. And within this shared environment, the arrangement of space also influenced social dynamics, as proximity played a role in shaping interactions, with individuals often becoming more familiar with those who occupied the same section or platform, leading to patterns of communication and observation that were defined by spatial relationships. And as time passed, these relationships, even when minimal or unspoken, became part of the lived experience within the barack, contributing to a sense of connection that was rooted in shared space and shared conditions. And as individuals continued to navigate this environment, the arrangement of the barack remained a constant influence, shaping not only the physical aspects of daily life, but also the ways in which individuals understood their place within the collective. And within this understanding, the barack itself became a microcosm of the larger camp, reflecting the broader themes of structure, adaptation, and coexistence that defined life within Birkenau. And as this perspective took shape, it became clear that the way space was organized within the barracks was not simply a matter of physical design, but a fundamental element of how life was experienced, influencing every aspect of daily existence and reinforcing the interconnected nature of individual and collective life within the camp, where thousands were brought together within a single space, and where the arrangement of that space defined the reality of their shared experience. Chapter 1, Segment 3. First Nights Inside. Adjusting to Shared Living. As the first day inside the barracks came to an end, and the structured rhythm of movement gradually slowed, individuals began to experience one of the most defining transitions within Birkenau: the shift from the activity of the day to the stillness of night within a shared and confined space. And for many, this moment marked the beginning of a new and unfamiliar phase-off adaptation, as the reality of living within the barack became more immediate and more personal. And as people settled into their assigned or found spaces upon the wooden platforms, the atmosphere within the barack changed in a subtle yet noticeable way, as the movement that had defined the earlier hours gave way to a quieter, more contained environment, where each individual was now faced with the task of resting within conditions that were far from what they had previously known. And within this setting, the concept of rest itself became something that required adjustment, as the physical arrangement of the barack, with its closely packed sleeping platforms and limited personal space, meant that individuals were not alone, but surrounded on all sides by others who were experiencing the same transition. And as the night began to unfold, the presence of many people within a single enclosed space became more apparent, not only through the physical closeness, but also through the subtle sounds and movements that accompanied it, the shifting of positions, the quiet exchanges, the natural rhythms of a space filled with life. And as individuals attempted to find comfort within these conditions, they were often required to adjust both physically and mentally, adapting to the shared nature of the space and the limitations it imposed. And within this process, the first nights inside the barack became a period of learning, where individuals began to understand how to position themselves, how to make use of the available space, and how to coexist with others in a way that allowed for some degree of rest, even within the constraints of the environment. And as this learning process continued, it was shaped largely by observation, as individuals looked to those around them who had already adapted, noting how they arranged themselves, how they minimized movement, and how they navigated the shared space with an awareness of others. And as these observations were translated into action, the barack began to take on a rhythm that was distinct from the daytime routine, a rhythm defined by stillness, subtle movement, and the gradual settling of many individuals into a collective state of rest. And within this rhythm, the experience of the first nights was not uniform, as each person brought their own thoughts, their own memories, and their own reactions to the environment, creating a layered experience where the external conditions were shared, but the internal experience remained deeply personal. And as the night progressed, the combination of physical fatigue from the day and the unfamiliarity of the environment shaped how individuals experienced rest, with some finding moments of sleep, while others remained more aware, adjusting gradually to the new reality of shared living within the barack. And in this way, the first nights inside became an essential part of the process of adaptation, marking the point at which the barack was no longer just a place to enter, but a place to live within, where the experience of the environment moved beyond observation and became an ongoing and deeply integrated part of daily life. As the nights continued and individuals became more accustomed to the environment of the barracks, the process of adaptation began to deepen, moving beyond the initial adjustments of physical positioning and shared space into a more sustained understanding of how to exist within this collective setting. And within this ongoing experience, the rhythm of the night became more familiar, as individuals learned to anticipate the patterns of movement and stillness that define the hours after the days routine had ended. And as this familiarity developed, it brought with it a subtle shift in perception, where the barack, once entirely unfamiliar, began to take on a sense of structure and predictability, even within its limitations. And within this evolving understanding, individuals often developed personal approaches to managing the experience of the night, finding ways to navigate the balance between rest and awareness, between the presence of others and their own internal thoughts. And for some, this meant focusing on the immediate physical experience, adjusting their position, conserving movement, and aligning themselves with the rhythm of those around them, while for others, the quieter moments of the night became a time for reflection, where thoughts turned inward, revisiting memories, considering the events of the day, or simply observing the passage of time within the stillness of the barack. And as these different experiences unfolded simultaneously within the shared space, they contributed to the overall atmosphere of the night, creating an environment that was both collective and individual, where the presence of many did not erase the uniqueness of each person's experience, but instead existed alongside it, forming a complex and layered reality. And as the nights passed, this reality became more integrated into daily life, as individuals came to understand not only how to rest within the barack, but also how the experience of the night connected to the broader rhythm of the camp, preparing them for the return of the day's routine and the continuation of the cycle. And within this continuity, the first nights inside the barack remained significant, as they marked the beginning of a deeper engagement with the environment, a point at which the initial unfamiliarity gave way to adaptation, and where the experience of shared living became an accepted and understood part of life within Birkenau. And in this way, the nights inside the barracks were not simply a pause between days, but a crucial phase of the overall experience, shaping how individuals adjusted, how they reflected, and how they navigated the ongoing reality of life within a space where thousands were brought together, and where each night added another layer to the understanding of what it meant to live within such an environment. Chapter 2, Segment 1. Morning inside the barracks, the start of the day. As the night slowly gave way to the earliest hours of morning inside the Barracks of Birkenau, the transition from stillness to activity did not occur suddenly, but rather unfolded gradually, shaped by the subtle shifts in light, sound, and movement that signaled the beginning of another day within the camp. And for those inside, this transition was not guided by personal choice or natural rhythm alone, but by the structured routine that defined life within the environment. And as the first indications of morning appeared, often before full daylight had reached the interior of the barack, individuals began to stir, not always fully awake at once, but moving from rest into awareness in a way that was influenced both by their own internal state and by the activity around them. And within this shared space, the presence of many individuals meant that no one experienced the morning in isolation, as the movements of one person often affected those nearby, creating a collective awakening that spread gradually across the barack. And as people shifted from their positions on the wooden platforms, adjusting themselves, sitting up or preparing to stand, the atmosphere within the space began to change, as the quiet of the night was replaced by soft but growing sounds of movement, the rustle of bodies, the quiet exchanges of words, when possible, and the general sense that the day was beginning. And within this process, the physical environment of the barack played a significant role, as the limited space required individuals to move carefully, navigating the narrow pathways between platforms, coordinating their actions with those around them to avoid unnecessary disruption. And as this coordinated movement unfolded, it reflected the adaptation that had taken place over time, where individuals had learned not only how to exist within the space, but also how to begin each day within it. And as the light increased, filtering through openings in the structure, it revealed the interior more clearly, highlighting the arrangement of the platforms, the presence of many individuals preparing for the day, and the overall density of the space. And within this growing visibility, the transition from night to day became more complete, as the barack shifted fully into its daytime state. And as individuals continued their preparations, the awareness of the routine that lay ahead became more prominent, as the morning inside the barack was not an isolated moment, but the first stage of a larger sequence that would define the entire day. And within this awareness, individuals often moved with a sense of purpose shaped by the expectations of the routine, preparing themselves for the next steps that would follow once they left the barack. And as this process continued, the experience of the morning became an integral part of daily life, shaping how individuals began their day, how they engaged with their surroundings, and how they transitioned from the shared stillness of the night into the structured activity of the camp. And in this way, the mornings inside the barracks represented not only the start of a new day, but also the continuation of a cycle that defined life within Birkenau, where each morning carried the familiarity of repetition and the certainty of the routine that would follow. As the process of waking and preparing for the day continued, the barack gradually transformed from a space of rest into a space of coordinated activity, where individuals, though acting within their own immediate needs, collectively contributed to the rhythm of the morning. And within this transformation, the shared nature of the environment became especially evident, as each movement, each action, was influenced by the presence of others, creating a dynamic where individual routines were interwoven into a larger pattern of collective behavior. and as individuals adjusted their positions, gathered their limited belongings, and prepared to move out of the barack, they did so with an awareness of both the space and the people around them, navigating the environment in a way that reflected their familiarity with its constraints. And as this familiarity guided their actions, it also contributed to a sense of order within the morning routine, where the repetition of daily behavior created a predictable flow, even within the limitations of the space. And as this flow developed, the barack itself seemed to shift in character, from a place of quiet rest to one of purposeful movement, where the energy of the space was directed toward the preparation for the day ahead. And within this shift, the experience of the individual remained closely tied to the collective, as the actions of each person were part of a broader pattern that defined the morning. And as individuals continued to move through this pattern, they often relied on their previous experience to guide them, knowing what to expect, how to position themselves, and how to respond to the unfolding sequence of events. And within this familiarity, there was a sense of continuity, as each morning followed a similar progression, reinforcing the rhythm of life within the camp. And as the preparations neared completion, the awareness of what lay beyond the barack became more immediate, as individuals anticipated the next stage of the routine, the movement outside, the gathering, and the continuation of the day's structured activities. And within this anticipation, the morning inside the barack served as a bridge between the internal and external aspects of life within Birkenau, connecting the shared experience of the enclosed space with the broader environment of the camp. And as individuals prepared to leave, the barack, which had been the center of their nighttime experience, became once again a space they would return to later, marking the cyclical nature of their daily lives. And in this way, the mornings inside the barracks were not simply a beginning, but a continuation, a repeated transition that shaped how each day unfolded, and how individuals moved between the different phases of life within the camp, where the shared space of the barack remained a constant point of return within a never-repeating cycle. Chapter 2, Segment 2. Daily Movement Inside, Navigating a Crowded Space. As the morning routine inside the barracks progressed beyond the initial moments of waking and preparation, the interior space gradually shifted into a state of continuous movement, where individuals, each following the expectations of the day, began to navigate the confined environment with a practiced awareness that had developed over time. And within this space, movement was never entirely independent, as the presence of many individuals within limited confines meant that every action, whether small or significant, was influenced by the positions and movements of others, creating a dynamic where navigation became a shared and coordinated process rather than a purely individual one. And as individuals stepped down from the wooden platforms, adjusted their footing on the narrow pathways, and began to move toward the exits or other areas within the barack, they did so with a careful attention to spacing, timing, and direction, ensuring that their actions aligned with the flow of those around them. And within this flow, there existed a kind of unspoken rhythm, shaped not by formal instruction, but by repeated experience, where individuals had learned how to move efficiently within the constraints of the environment, minimizing disruption while maintaining the pace required by the routine. And as this movement unfolded, the physical structure of the barack played a defining role, as the arrangement of platforms, support beams, and limited pathways created natural channels through which people moved, guiding their direction and influencing how they interacted with the space. And within these channels, the density of the environment was particularly evident, as individuals often moved in close proximity, adjusting their pace and position in response to the actions of others, creating a constant interplay between movement and stillness, where progress was, sometimes gradual, shaped by the need to navigate carefully through the shared space. And as this process continued, the barack became a place not only of rest or preparation, but of active transition, where individuals moved between different stages of the day, carrying with them the awareness of the routine that structured their actions. And within this transitional space, the experience of movement was both physical and perceptual, as individuals not only navigated the environment but also interpreted it, understanding how the space functioned and how their own actions fit within it. And as they became more familiar with these patterns, their movements became more fluid, more aligned with the rhythm of the barack, reflecting a level of adaptation that allowed them to exist within the crowded environment with a degree of efficiency. And as the morning progressed, this coordinated movement became one of the defining characteristics of life inside the barracks, illustrating how individuals adapted to the limitations of space and the presence of others, and how the environment itself shaped the way they moved, interacted, and experienced their daily lives within Birkenau. As this pattern of movement continued throughout the morning and into the broader flow of the day, it became clear that navigating the crowded space of the barack was not a temporary adjustment, but a sustained aspect of daily life, one that required continuous awareness and adaptation, and within this sustained experience, individuals developed an intuitive understanding of how to move within the environment, recognizing not only the physical layout but also the behavior of those around them, anticipating movements, adjusting their own actions accordingly, and contributing to a collective rhythm that allowed the space to function despite its limitations. And as this intuitive understanding deepened, it influenced not only how individuals navigated the barack, but also how they perceived it, as the once unfamiliar environment became a space defined by patterns, routes, and points of interaction that were learned through repetition and experience. And within this perception, the barack took on a sense of structure that extended beyond its physical form, becoming a dynamic environment shaped by the movement of those within it, where each pathway, each platform, and each open space played a role in the overall flow of activity. And as individuals continued to engage with this environment, they also became more aware of the subtle variations within it, moments where movement slowed or intensified, areas where space felt more constrained or more open, and these variations added depth to the experience of navigating the barack, creating a layered understanding of how the space functioned at different times and under different conditions. And as this layered understanding developed, it contributed to a sense of familiarity that, while shaped by the limitations of the environment, provided a framework for daily life, allowing individuals to move through the barack with a degree of predictability and awareness. And within this framework, the act-off movement became more than just a practical necessity. It became an integral part of the experience of living within the barack, shaping how individuals interacted with their surroundings, how they coordinated with others, and how they navigated the shared reality of the space. And as the day progressed and individuals moved in and out of the barack, returning at different times and for different purposes, this pattern of movement remained consistent, reinforcing the idea that the barack was not a static environment but a space of continuous activity and interaction, where the flow of people defined its character as much as its physical structure. And in this way, the daily movement inside the barracks became a central element of life within Birkenau, reflecting the broader themes of adaptation, coordination, and shared experience that defined existence within the camp, where every step, every adjustment, and every interaction contributed to the ongoing rhythm of life within a space that was constantly in motion. Chapter 2, Segment 3. Returning to the barracks, the end of the day. As the structured rhythm of the day moved toward its final stages, and the hours of labor and activity outside the barracks gradually came to an end, individuals began the process of returning to the interior spaces that had become central to their daily lives. And this return, though repeated day after day, carried its own distinct character, shaped by the transition from the open environment of the camp back into the enclosed and shared space of the barack. And as individuals moved in groups along the defined paths of Birkenau, approaching the familiar Rouse-Off buildings, there was a sense of movement that was both collective and purposeful, as each person followed the routine that guided them back to the same structure they had left earlier. And within this movement, the barracks, which had remained in place throughout the day, waiting ascendant fixtures within the landscape, now became active once again, as they filled with returning individuals, and as people crossed the threshold into the barack. The change in atmosphere was immediate, as the exterior space, with its broader expanse and shifting light, gave way to the more contained and familiar interior, where the structure of platforms, pathways, and shared areas once again defined the environment. And within this transition, there was often a moment of reorientation, as individuals adjusted from the external routine to the internal one, moving from the patterns of work and movement outside to the more confined and shared experience within the barack. And as this process unfolded, the space gradually filled with activity, as individuals found their places, navigated the limited pathways, and began to settle into the evening phase of the day. And within this settling process, the physical experience of returning became closely tied to the mental and perceptual shift that accompanied it, as the barack once again became the center of their immediate experience, shaping how they rested, how they interacted, and how they reflected in the day that had passed. And as the number of people inside the barack increased, the density of the space became more apparent. As the platforms filled, the pathways became more active, and the overall atmosphere shifted from the relative openness of the outside environment to the enclosed and shared reality of the interior. And within this environment, the act of returning was not simply a physical movement, but a transition into a different phase of daily life, where the pace of activity changed and where the focus shifted from the tasks of the day to the experience of being within the barack. And as individuals continued to settle into their spaces, the barack gradually moved toward a new state, one defined by the collective presence of many people preparing for the evening and night. And in this way, the return to the barracks marked an essential part of the daily cycle, a transition that connected the external and internal aspects of life within Birkenau, and that reinforced the central role of the barack as both a physical space and a lived environment within the camp. As the evening inside the barracks progressed and the initial movement of return began to settle into a more stable rhythm, the atmosphere within the space gradually shifted once again, moving from the active process of re-entry to a quieter and more contained state, where individuals, having found their places, began to adjust to the conditions of the evening. And within this transition, the shared nature of the environment remained a defining feature, as the presence of many individuals within a confined space created a collective experience that was shaped by both proximity and routine. And as people arranged themselves on the platforms, adjusted their positions, and prepared for the night, the patterns of behavior that had developed over time became evident, as individuals moved with a familiarity that reflected their adaptation to the environment. And within this familiarity, there was a sense of continuity, as the actions of the evening followed a sequence that was repeated each day, reinforcing the rhythm of life within the barack. And as this rhythm unfolded, the interaction between individuals took on a quieter and more subdued form, as the focus shifted from movement to rest, and from the external demands of the day to the internal experience of the shared space. And within this quieter atmosphere, moments of reflection often emerged, as individuals, now removed from the activity of the day, had the opportunity to process their experiences, consider the events that had taken place, and prepare mentally for the continuation of the routine. And as these moments of reflection occurred, they were shaped by the environment, influenced by the presence of others, the sounds within the barack, and the overall sense of enclosure that defined the space. And as the evening moved closer to night, the barack gradually transitioned into a state of stillness, though never complete silence, as the natural presence of many individuals ensured that some level of sound and movement remained, creating a background that accompanied the process of rest. And within this state, the experience of returning to the barracks came full circle, as the space that had been left in the morning once again became the center of daily life, marking the end of one cycle and the preparation for the next. And as this cycle repeated over time, the act of returning became an integral part of the overall experience of life within Birkenau, shaping how individuals understood the progression of their days and how they navigated the continuous movement between the external and internal environments of the camp. And in this way, the end of the day inside the barracks was not simply a conclusion, but a transition, a moment that connected the experiences of the past, the present, and the coming day, and that reinforced the enduring presence of the barack as a central element of life within the camp. Chapter 3, Segment 1. Living close together, shared space and constant presence. As individuals continued to spend days and nights inside the barracks of Birkenau, one of the most defining aspects of life within these spaces became increasingly clear: the constant presence of others, an experience shaped not by occasional interaction, but by continuous proximity, where personal and shared space existed side by side in a way that required ongoing adaptation. And within this environment, the idea of living close together was not simply a condition, but a central reality that influenced every moment of daily life, from rest to movement, from quiet reflection to subtle interaction. And as individuals settled more deeply into the routine of the Barak, they became more aware of how this closeness shaped their experience, as the boundaries between one person and another were minimal, defined less by physical separation and more by an understanding of shared existence within limited space. And within this setting, the arrangement of the platforms with multiple individuals occupying the same level reinforced the sense that space was collective rather than individual, as each person adjusted their position in relation to those around them, creating a dynamic where every movement, however small, had an effect on others. And as this dynamic unfolded, individuals developed a heightened awareness of their surroundings, not only observing the physical layout of the Barak, but also the presence and actions of those nearby. And this awareness became a key part of navigating daily life as it allowed individuals to move, rest, and exist within the shared space with a degree of coordination, minimizing disruption while adapting to the constraints of the environment. And as the days continued to pass, this shared presence became a constant backdrop to all experiences within the Barak, shaping how individuals perceived their environment and how they engaged with it. And within this constant presence, there was a sense of continuity, as the same individuals often occupied the same spaces over time, creating a form of familiarity that, while limited, contributed to a deeper understanding of the shared environment. And as this familiarity developed, it influenced the way individuals interacted, often through subtle and unspoken means, such as the way they adjusted their movements, respected the limited space of others, or recognized patterns of behavior that had become part of the daily rhythm. And within this framework, the experience of living close together became more than just a physical condition. It became a defining element of life within the Barak, shaping not only how individuals navigated their surroundings, but also how they understood their place within a collective environment. And as this understanding deepened, it revealed the extent to which the shared nature of the space influenced every aspect of daily life, from the smallest actions to the broader experience of living within Birkenau, where the presence of others was constant and where individual and collective existence were closely intertwined. As this continuous proximity became an established part of daily life within the barracks, its influence extended beyond physical movement and spatial awareness into the deeper experience of how individuals related to their environment and to one another, shaping a perspective that was defined by coexistence within shared conditions. And within this perspective, individuals often developed ways of navigating the presence of others that balanced awareness with adaptation, as they learned to exist within the collective space without constant focus on the limitations it imposed, allowing the shared environment to become a normalized aspect of their daily experience. And as this normalization took place, the Barak itself began to feel less like a temporary or unfamiliar setting and more like a defined space with its own patterns, rhythms, and expectations, shaped by the ongoing presence of those within it. And within this evolving understanding, the constant presence of others contributed to a sense of connection that, while not always expressed through direct communication, was nonetheless present in the shared experience of living within the same environment, where each individual was aware, in varying degrees, of the others around them, and where this awareness created a form of collective existence that was both practical and perceptual. And as individuals continued to navigate this shared space, they often relied on small and subtle adjustments to maintain a sense of balance, such as aligning their movements with those nearby, adapting their behavior to fit the rhythm of the group, or finding moments of stillness within the broader activity of the Barak. And within these adjustments, there was an ongoing process of adaptation that allowed the shared environment to function, even within its constraints. And as this process continued over time, it became clear that the experience of living close together was not static, but dynamic, shaped by the interactions, observations, and adaptations of those within the space. And within this dynamic environment, the relationship between the individual and the collective remained central, as each person's experience was influenced by the presence of others. And as individuals continued to move through their daily routines, this relationship became an integral part of how they understood life within the Barak, shaping their perception of space, their approach to interaction, and their overall experience of living within Birkenau. And in this way, the constant presence of others was not merely a background condition, but a defining element of the environment, influencing every aspect of daily life and reinforcing the interconnected nature of existence within the barracks, where individuals lived not in isolation, but in continuous proximity, sharing space, time, and experience within a setting that brought thousands together under the same roof. Chapter 3, Segment 2. Sounds of the Barracks, the constant background of life. As individuals spent more time within the Barracks of Birkenau, adapting not only to the physical arrangement and shared space but also to the continuous presence of others, another defining aspect of life inside these structures became increasingly noticeable. The sound, a constant and ever-present background that shaped the atmosphere of the Barak in ways that were both subtle and profound, and unlike the open spaces outside, where sound could disperse more freely, the enclosed environment of the Barak contained and amplified the noises created by daily life, creating a layered and ongoing auditory experience that accompanied every moment within the space. And for those inside, this experience was not defined by a single type of sound, but by a combination of many, the quiet movements of individuals adjusting their positions, the soft murmur of voices when communication was possible, the natural rhythms of breathing and shifting within a shared space, and the occasional louder sounds that mark transitions between different phases of the day, all blending together to form a continuous soundscape that defined the interior environment. And as individuals became more familiar with this soundscape, they began to recognize its patterns, understanding how the intensity and nature of the sounds changed throughout the day, from the more active and varied noises of the morning and evening to the subdued and repetitive sounds of the night. And within this recognition, the sounds of the Barak became a way of interpreting the passage of time, as the auditory environment provided cues about the stage of the daily routine, and as individuals listened, often unconsciously, they could sense the progression of the day through the changes in sound. And within this context, sound was not merely a background element, but an integral part of the experience of living within the Barak, shaping how individuals perceived their surroundings and how they engaged with the environment. And as the days passed, this constant presence of sound became something that individuals adapted to, learning to focus on certain elements while allowing others to fade into the background, creating a form of selective awareness that helped them navigate the auditory complexity of the space. And within this adaptation, the sounds of the Barak became both familiar and defining, contributing to the overall atmosphere and influencing the way individuals experienced their daily lives. And as this experience deepened, it became clear that the auditory environment of the Barak was as much a part of its structure as the physical elements, shaping the perception of space and time and reinforcing the shared nature of life within Birkenau, where every sound, no matter how small, was part of a collective experience that connected individuals to the environment and to one another. As this continuous soundscape became more deeply integrated into daily life, its influence extended beyond simple perception into the way individuals responded to their environment, shaping not only how they heard the Barak but also how they existed within it. And within this auditory environment, individuals often developed a form of awareness that allowed them to interpret sounds as part of the routine, distinguishing between those that signaled movement, those that indicated stillness, and those that reflected the presence and activity of others. And as this interpretive awareness developed, it became an essential part of navigating the shared space, as individuals relied on sound, along with visual cues, to understand what was happening around them and to anticipate the actions of those nearby. And within this process, the sounds of the barack also contributed to a sense of connection, as they served as a constant reminder of the presence of others, reinforcing the idea that life within the space was inherently collective, and even in moments of relative quiet, the subtle background of sound ensured that individuals were never entirely isolated from the environment or from one another. And as the day transitioned into night, this auditory experience took on a different character, as the sounds became more subdued yet more noticeable, with the reduced activity allowing even the smallest noises to stand out, creating an atmosphere where the quiet was not defined by silence, but by the absence of louder activity. And within this quieter soundscape, individuals often became more aware of their own presence within the space, as well as the presence of others, leading to moments of reflection or heightened awareness that were shaped by the auditory environment. And as the nights passed and the cycle of sound continued, individuals became increasingly accustomed to the patterns that defined the barack, allowing the constant background of noise to become a stable and recognizable element of their daily lives. And within this stability, the sounds of the barack played a crucial role in shaping the overall experience of living within Birkenau, influencing how individuals perceived their surroundings, how they adapted to the shared environment, and how they understood the passage of time within a space that was defined not only by what could be seen, but also by what could be heard. And in this way, the auditory dimension of the barack became an essential part of its reality, a continuous and defining presence that connected individuals to their environment and to each other, reinforcing the shared nature of life within the camp and adding another layer to the complex experience of living within the Barracks of Birkenau. Chapter 3, Segment 3. Privacy and Personal Space: What Was Lost and What Remained. As individuals continued to adapt to life inside the Barracks of Birkenau, one of the most profound changes they experienced was not always immediately visible, but deeply felt: the transformation of personal space and privacy, concepts that, in their previous lives, had been shaped by physical boundaries, individual choice, and moments of solitude. Yet within the barack, these concepts took on an entirely different meaning, as the environment itself was defined by shared space, close proximity, and the constant presence of others. And for those living within this setting, the idea of privacy was no longer tied to physical separation, as the structure of the barack, with its tiered platforms and densely arranged occupants, left little room for isolation, and instead, privacy became something more subtle, something that existed not in the physical sense, but in the internal and perceptual experience of each individual. And as this shift took place, individuals began to navigate a new understanding of what it meant to have a sense of personal space, as they adapted to the reality that their immediate surroundings were always shared, that their movements were observed, and that their presence was part of a larger collective environment. And within this context, the boundaries that once defined individuality became less distinct, as the physical closeness of others required a continuous adjustment of behavior, where actions were influenced by the awareness of those nearby, and where the space one occupied was never entirely one's own, but rather part of a shared arrangement that had to accommodate many. And as individuals engaged with this reality, they developed ways of maintaining a sense of self within the collective environment, often through internal means such as thought, memory, and quiet reflection, creating a form of personal space that existed within the mind rather than in the physical world. And within this internal space, individuals could retreat, even briefly, from the constant presence of others, finding moments of personal awareness that were not defined by the limitations of the barack. And as this internal dimension became more significant, it contributed to a deeper understanding of how identity and individuality were preserved within the shared environment, not through physical separation, but through the ability to maintain a sense of self within the constraints of the space. And as this process unfolded, it revealed the complexity of living within the barack, where the loss of traditional privacy did not eliminate the experience of individuality, but instead transformed it, creating a new way of understanding personal space that was shaped by both the environment and the internal resilience of each individual. And in this way, the experience of privacy within the barracks became a central aspect of life in Birkenau, highlighting the contrast between physical conditions and internal experience, and illustrating how individuals adapted to the loss of external boundaries by redefining what it meant to have a sense of personal space within a collective setting. As this redefined sense of privacy continued to shape daily life within the barracks, individuals began to develop subtle and often unspoken methods of preserving a degree of personal identity within the shared environment, creating small and temporary boundaries that, while not physically separating them from others, provided a sense of distinction within the collective space. And within this process, even the smallest actions could take on significance, such as the way an individual arranged their limited belongings, the way they positioned themselves on the platform, or the way they engaged or chose not to engage with those around them, each action contributing to a sense of personal presence within a space that was otherwise defined by shared occupancy. And as these small acts of differentiation accumulated, they formed a pattern through which individuals could maintain a connection to their own identity, even within the constraints of the environment. And within this pattern, there was also an awareness of the boundaries of others. As individuals, having experienced the loss of their own physical privacy, often recognized the importance of respecting the limited personal space of those around them, leading to a form of coexistence that was guided not by formal rules, but by a shared understanding of the need for balance within the confined space. And as this shared understanding developed, it contributed to the overall atmosphere of the Barak, creating an environment where, despite the lack of physical separation, there existed a subtle structure of mutual awareness, where individuals navigated their interactions with a sensitivity to the presence and needs of others. And as time passed, this balance between shared space and personal identity became more deeply integrated into the experience of daily life, shaping how individuals perceived their environment and how they engaged with it. And within this integration, the concept of privacy continued to evolve, no longer defined by what was absent, but by what remained, the internal space of thought, the small expressions of individuality, and the quiet recognition of one's own presence within the collective. And as individuals continued to live within this environment, these elements became essential to their experience, providing a sense of continuity and identity that existed alongside the shared reality of the Barak. And in this way, the experience of privacy and personal space within Birkenau was not simply a story of loss, but also one of adaptation and redefinition, where individuals, faced with the limitations of their surroundings, found ways to preserve a sense of self within a space that brought thousands together, and where the boundaries of personal experience were shaped not by physical walls, but by the resilience of the human mind and the ability to maintain individuality within a collective world. Chapter 4, Segment 1. Daily Routine Inside the Barracks, the Rhythm of Survival. As life within the Barracks of Birkenau continued day after day, what began to define existence for those inside was not a single event or moment, but a repeating rhythm, a structured sequence of time that, while imposed from outside, gradually shaped the internal experience of those who lived within it. And this rhythm, though consistent, was not marked by comfort or familiarity in the traditional sense, but by predictability, a cycle that, once understood, became a framework through which individuals could orient themselves within the passing days. And in the early hours, before the full light of day had settled over the camp, movement would begin to stir within the barracks, not all at once, but gradually as individuals became aware of the approaching transition from night to morning. And within this period, the sounds and sensations of the shared space would shift, as the stillness of the night gave way to the subtle signs of activity, the quiet adjustments of position, the preparation for what was to come. And as this transition unfolded, individuals would begin to align themselves with the expectations of the routine, moving not in isolation, but as part of a larger collective that was bound by the same sequence of events. And within this shared movement, there was a sense of coordination, not formally organized, but developed through repetition and familiarity, as individuals learned how to navigate the limited space and the presence of others while preparing for the day ahead. And as the morning progressed, the Barak itself became a place of transition, where the internal environment connected with the external world of the camp, as individuals moved between these spaces, carrying with them the awareness of the routine that structured their lives. And within this process, the concept of time became closely tied to action, as each phase of the day was defined not by a clock, but by the sequence of activities that followed one another, and as individuals engaged with this sequence, they began to develop an internal sense of timing, an understanding of how the day would unfold, and what would be expected at each stage. And within this understanding, there was a form of adaptation, as individuals adjusted their thoughts and behaviors to align with the rhythm of the routine, creating a sense of continuity that, while shaped by external conditions, became an integral part of their daily experience. And as the hours of the day passed, this rhythm continued to guide movement and activity, shaping how individuals interacted with the space of the barack, how they returned to it, and how they prepared once again for the transition into night. And in this way, the daily routine within the barracks became more than a sequence of events. It became a defining structure of life, a pattern that provided a sense of order within an environment that was otherwise defined by uncertainty. And as individuals continued to live within this pattern, it shaped not only their actions, but also their perception of time, creating a framework through which each day was experienced as part of a larger, ongoing cycle. As this rhythm of daily life became more deeply ingrained, its influence extended beyond the structure of time and into the mental and emotional adaptation of those who lived within it, as individuals began to rely on the predictability of the routine as a way of navigating their environment. And within this reliance, the repetition of actions and sequences provided a form of stability, a consistent pattern that could be anticipated even when other aspects of life remained uncertain. And as this sense of predictability developed, it allowed individuals to focus their attention on the immediate tasks and transitions that defined each phase of the day, creating a form of present-focused awareness that helped them move through the routine with a degree of clarity. And within this awareness, the barack itself continued to play a central role, serving as both the starting point and the ending point of each day, a space that, while shared and structured, became familiar through repetition. And, as individuals returned to the barack at the end of the day, the environment would once again shift, as the activity of the external world gave way to the more contained and subdued atmosphere of the interior, and within this transition, there was a gradual movement towards stillness, as individuals settled into their places, preparing for the night and the continuation of the cycle. And as this process repeated itself over time, the boundaries between individual days began to blur, as each day followed a similar pattern, creating a sense of continuity that was defined by repetition rather than variation. And within this continuity, individuals developed an understanding of their place within the routine, recognizing how their actions fit into the larger sequence of events, and how the rhythm of the day connected them to the collective experience of those around them. And as this understanding deepened, the daily routine became not only a structure imposed from outside, but also an internalized framework through which individuals interpreted their experience, shaping how they perceived time, how they engaged with their environment, and how they maintained a sense of continuity within the ongoing cycle of life in the barracks. And in this way, the rhythm of survival within Birkenau was defined not only by the events of each day, but by the repetition and predictability that connected those days together, creating a pattern that, while simple in its structure, held a profound influence over the experience of those who lived within it. And as this pattern continued, it reinforced the interconnected nature of life within the barracks, where each individual, while maintaining their own perspective, was also part of a larger, shared rhythm that defined the passage of time and the structure of daily existence. Chapter 4, Segment 2. Morning to evening, the flow of a single day. As the rhythm of daily life within the barracks became familiar, the passage from morning to evening took on a distinct and recognizable flow, one that unfolded in stages rather than moments, creating a continuous progression that shaped how individuals experienced time within Birkenau. And as the first signs of morning began to emerge, there was no sudden beginning, but rather a gradual transition, as the stillness of the night slowly gave way to the awareness of a new day, And within this transition, individuals would begin to sense the shift not only through light, but through the subtle changes in the environment, the quiet movements of others, the adjustment oppositions within the shared space, and the collective recognition that the day was about to begin. And as this awareness spread, the Barak would come to life in a measured and subdued way, as individuals prepared themselves for the sequence of events that they had come to expect. And within this preparation, there was an understanding that the day ahead would follow a familiar pattern, one that had been repeated many times before, and as this pattern unfolded, the morning hours were often defined by movement, as individuals transitioned from the interior of the barak to the exterior spaces of the camp, carrying with them the awareness of the routine that guided their actions. And within this movement, there was a sense of coordination, not through direct communication, but through shared experience as individuals navigated the same paths and responded to the same expectations. And as the morning progressed into midday, the pace of the day would shift, as the initial transitions gave way to a more sustained period of activity, where the focus moved from preparation to continuation. And within this phase, time often felt different, as the repetition of actions created a sense of continuity that blurred the distinction between individual moments. And as individuals engaged with this phase of the day, they relied on their internal sense of timing, recognizing how far the day had progressed based on the sequence of events rather than any external measure. And within this understanding, the midday period became a central part of the daily experience, a time when the rhythm of the routine was most fully realized, as the actions of individuals aligned with the broader pattern of the camp. And as the day moved forward, the transition toward evening began to take shape, not abruptly, but gradually, as the pace of activity began to change once again. And as individuals became aware of this shift, they prepared for the return to the barracks, carrying with them the experiences of the day and the anticipation of the next phase of the routine. And in this way, the flow from morning to evening was not defined by isolated events, but by a continuous progression, a sequence that connected each part of the day into a cohesive whole, shaping how individuals perceived time and how they navigated the structure of daily life within Birkenau. As the evening phase of the day settled in, the transition back into the barracks marked not just a change in location, but a shift in atmosphere, as the external movement and activity of the day gave way to a more contained and introspective environment. And within this transition, individuals would return to the same shared space from which they had begun the day. Yet the experience of the barak in the evening was often different from that of the morning, as it carried with it the accumulation of the day's events, the sense of completion of one cycle and the anticipation of the next. And as individuals settled into their places, the barak would gradually become quieter, though never completely silent, as the sounds of movement were replaced by more subdued and consistent patterns, creating an environment that reflected the transition from activity to rest. And within this environment, individuals often became more aware of the passage of time, as the slower pace of the evening allowed for moments of reflection, where the experiences of the day could be processed. And as this awareness deepened, the evening became a time of transition not only in terms of the daily routine, but also in terms of perception, as individuals moved from the external focus of the day to a more internal experience, shaped by thought and memory. And as the night approached, the barak would once again enter a phase of relative stillness, as individuals prepared for rest, aligning themselves within the shared space in a way that allowed for the continuation of the cycle. And within this preparation, there was recognition of the repetitive nature of the routine, as each evening mirrored the one before it, creating a sense of continuity that connected one day to the next. And as this cycle repeated, the distinction between individual days became less pronounced, as the flow from morning to evening and back again created a continuous sequence that defined the experience of time within the barracks. And within this sequence, individuals developed a deep familiarity with the structure of the day, understanding not only what would happen, but how it would feel, how the transitions between phases would shape their experience, and how the rhythm of the routine would continue. And in this way, the flow of a single day within Birkenau was not simply a passage of time, but a structured and repeated experience, one that shaped how individuals lived, how they adapted, and how they understood their place within the larger pattern of life in the barracks, where each day, though similar to the last, carried its own subtle variations, yet remained part of an ongoing cycle that defined existence within the camp. Chapter 4, Segment 3. Night inside the barracks between rest and awareness. As the final phase of the day settled over Birkenau, the transition into night brought with it a distinct change in atmosphere within the barracks, one that was not defined simply by darkness, but by a gradual slowing of movement and a shift in awareness, as individuals moved from the structured rhythm of daytime activity into a more subdued and introspective state. And within this transition, the barack became a space where the collective energy of the day began to settle, where the sounds that had filled the environment softened into a quieter, more consistent background, and as individuals returned to their assigned places, positioning themselves within the shared platforms, there was a sense of repetition in the act itself, as the process of preparing for rest had become familiar through the passage of many days. And yet, despite this familiarity, each night carried its own subtle variations, shaped by the experiences of the day that had preceded it. And as individuals adjusted to the limited space available to them, finding positions that allowed for rest within the constraints of the environment, the concept of rest itself took on a different meaning, as it was not defined solely by physical comfort, but by the opportunity to pause, to momentarily step away from the continuous sequence of the daily routine. And within this pause, there existed a complex balance between rest and awareness, as the shared nature of the barack meant that individuals were never entirely isolated from the presence of others, and even as they sought rest, they remained connected to the environment through the sounds and movements that continued around them. And as the night deepened, the barack entered a state that could be described as quiet. Yet this quiet was not the absence of sound, but rather a reduction in intensity, where the louder and more varied noises of the day gave way to softer, more repetitive patterns, creating an auditory environment that was both calming and constant. And within this environment, individuals often became more aware of their own thoughts, as the reduced external activity allowed for a greater focus on the internal. And as this awareness unfolded, the night became a time when memory and reflection could emerge, as individuals revisited the experience of the day, or recalled moments from before their time in the camp, creating a connection between the present and the past that existed within the quiet space of the mind. And as this process continued, the night within the barack became more than a period of rest. It became a distinct phase of experience, one that combined physical stillness with mental activity, shaping how individuals engaged with both their environment and themselves. And as the hours passed, the steady rhythm of the night continued, guiding the barack toward the eventual transition back into morning. And in this way, the experience of night within Birkenau was defined not only by the absence of daylight, but by the unique atmosphere it created, where rest and awareness existed side by side, forming an essential part of the daily cycle. As the night progressed and the barack remained in this state of subdued activity, the passage off time itself began to feel different, as the absence of clearly defined events or transitions made each moment blend into the next, creating a continuous flow that was marked not by change, but by consistency. And within this flow, individuals often relied on subtle cues to understand the progression of the night, the gradual shift in temperature, the changing patterns of sound, or the internal sense of time that developed through repeated experience. And as these cues were recognized, they contributed to a deeper familiarity with the night as a phase of the daily routine, allowing individuals to anticipate the eventual return of morning, even when the exact moment of that transition remained uncertain. And within this anticipation, there was a quiet awareness of the cyclical nature of life within the barracks, as each night led into a new day, and each day eventually returned to night, creating a pattern that, while repetitive, provided a sense of continuity within the broader experience. And as individuals moved through this cycle, the night became a time where the boundaries between individual and collective experience were both present and blurred, as each person occupied their own space within the shared environment. yet remained connected to the presence of others through the subtle and continuous background of sound and movement. And within this shared experience, there was a form of coexistence that did not rely on direct interaction, but on the simple awareness of being part of a larger group. And as this awareness persisted, it contributed to the overall atmosphere of the Barak, reinforcing the idea that life within the space was inherently collective, even in moments of stillness. And as the night gradually approached its end, the first signs of the coming morning would begin to emerge, not as a sudden shift, but as a continuation of the same gradual process that had marked the transition into night. And within this early stage of morning, the cycle would begin again, as the quiet of the night gave way to the subtle movements of individuals preparing for the day ahead. And in this way, the experience of night within the barracks was not an isolated phase, but an integral part of the ongoing rhythm of life in Birkenau, connecting one day to the next and shaping how individuals understood the passage of time, the nature of rest, and the relationship between the internal and external aspects of their experience. And through this continuous cycle, the night became both a conclusion and a beginning, a moment of pause within an unending sequence that defined the structure of daily life within the barracks. Chapter 5, Segment 1. The human connections inside the barracks' shared existence. As life within the Barracks of Birkenau continued to follow its repetitive rhythm, shaped by routine, space, and time, another dimension of existence gradually revealed itself, one that was less defined by structure and more by presence. The human connections that formed within the shared environment, and within a space where individuals lived in close proximity, where the boundaries between one person and another were often defined only by inches. The experience of being surrounded by others became an essential aspect of daily life, influencing not only how individuals navigated the physical space, but also how they understood their place within it. And as individuals settled into the patterns of life inside the Barak, they became increasingly aware of those around them, not through formal introductions or defined relationships, but through the continuous observation of shared routines, the recognition of familiar faces, and the subtle understanding that developed from occupying the same space over time. And within this awareness, connections began to form in ways that were often quiet and unspoken, as individuals learned to read the presence of others through small details, the way someone moved within the limited space, the consistency of their actions, the patterns of their behavior during different times of the day. And as these observations accumulated, they created a sense of familiarity that contributed to the overall atmosphere of the Barak, transforming it from a purely physical structure into a space defined by human presence. And as this sense of familiarity grew, individuals often found themselves connected to others not through direct communication, but through shared experience, as the routines, the transitions, and the rhythms of daily life created a common framework that linked everyone within the space. And within this shared framework, there was a recognition that, despite the individuality of each person, their experiences were intertwined, shaped by the same environment and the same sequence of events. And as this understanding deepened, it influenced how individuals interacted with one another, even in the absence of words, as the awareness of shared experience created a form of connection that was both subtle and pervasive. And within this connection, the presence of others became a constant element of life, something that could not be separated from the experience of the Barak. And as individuals adapted to this reality, they developed ways of coexisting within the shared space, adjusting their movements, their behaviors, and their awareness in response to those around them, creating a dynamic environment where each person's presence influenced the experience of others. And as this dynamic continued, it became clear that the human connections within the barracks were not defined by traditional forms of relationship, but by the continuous and shared existence that brought individuals together, forming a network of presence that shaped the atmosphere of the space and contributed to the overall experience of life within Birkenau. As these quiet and often unspoken connections continued to develop, they began to influence not only how individuals perceived one another, but also how they navigated the shared environment, creating a subtle structure of coexistence that allowed for a degree of balance within the confined space. And within this structure, individuals often became attuned to the rhythms and needs of those around them, recognizing patterns in behavior and responding in ways that supported the collective experience. Whether through small adjustments in movement, the sharing of limited space, or the simple act of acknowledging the presence of others. And as this attunement deepened, it contributed to a form of social awareness that, while not formally organized, played an important role in shaping the daily life of the Barak. And within this awareness, there was also a recognition of the diversity of individuals within the space, as each person brought their own history, perspective, and way of adapting to the environment. And as these differences became more apparent, they added complexity to the shared experience, creating a space where individuality and collectivity existed side by side. And as individuals engaged with this complexity, they developed ways of maintaining their own sense of identity while also participating in the collective environment, balancing the need for personal awareness with the realities of shared living. And within this balance, the connections between individuals continue to evolve, shaped by time, proximity, and the ongoing experience of life within the Barak. And as these connections persisted, they contributed to a deeper understanding of what it meant to exist within such a space, where the presence of others was both constant and influential, and where the experience of daily life was shaped not only by external structures, but by the relationships, however subtle, that formed between those who shared the environment. And in this way, the human connections within the barracks became an essential part of the overall experience of Birkenau, illustrating how individuals, even within a highly structured and collective setting, found ways to connect, to recognize one another, and to create a shared sense of existence that extended beyond the physical boundaries of the space, shaping both the atmosphere of the Barak and the lived experience of those within it. Chapter 5, Segment 2. Unspoken Understanding, Communication Without Words. As the shared existence within the barracks continued to shape the experience of those living inside, another layer of human connection gradually became more visible, not through spoken language or direct interaction, but through a quieter and more subtle form of communication that existed beneath the surface of daily life, and within the confined and collective environment of Birkenau, where words were not always possible or practical. Individuals often relied on alternative ways of understanding one another, developing a form of communication that was based on observation, awareness, and the recognition of patterns. And as individuals spent more time within the same space, participating in the same routines, and experiencing the same sequences of events, they began to interpret the actions and expressions of those around them with increasing clarity, learning to recognize meaning in gestures, in posture, in the timing of movement, and in the small, often overlooked details that conveyed intention without the need for speech. And within this process, communication became something that extended beyond language, something that was embedded in the shared experience of the environment, as individuals responded to one another not through explicit exchange, but through a continuous flow of subtle signals. And as this form of communication developed, it created a sense of connection that was both immediate and intuitive, as individuals could understand and respond to one another in ways that did not require words. And within this understanding, there was recognition of the limitations of spoken communication within the Barak, as the conditions of the environment, combined with the presence of many individuals within a confined space, often made verbal interaction difficult or limited, and as a result, the reliance on nonverbal communication became an essential part of daily life, shaping how individuals interacted with one another and how they navigated the shared environment. And as this reliance grew, individuals became increasingly skilled at interpreting the signals around them, developing a heightened awareness of their surroundings and of the people within them. And within this awareness, even the smallest gesture could carry meaning: a glance, a shift in position, a pause in movement, each becoming part of a larger system of communication that connected individuals to one another. And as this system continued to evolve, it reinforced the idea that understanding did not always require words, but could instead emerge from the shared experience of being in the same place, at the same time, participating in the same rhythm of daily life. And in this way, The unspoken understanding that developed within the barracks became a defining feature of the human connections that existed there, illustrating how individuals adapted to their environment by finding new ways to communicate, to connect, and to navigate the complexities of shared existence without relying solely on spoken language. As this form of unspoken communication became more deeply embedded in daily life, it began to influence not only how individuals interacted with one another, but also how they perceived themselves within the collective environment, as the ability to understand and be understood without words created a sense of connection that extended beyond individual experience, linking each person to the broader network of presence within the Barak. And within this network, communication was not limited to direct exchanges but existed as a continuous and shared process, where individuals both contributed to and were influenced by the subtle signals that surrounded them. And as this process unfolded, it created a dynamic environment in which meaning was constantly being formed and interpreted, shaped by the interactions and awareness of those within the space. And within this dynamic, individuals often found themselves responding to cues almost instinctively, adjusting their behavior in ways that aligned with the collective rhythm, and as this instinctive response developed, it further strengthened the sense of cohesion within the Barak, as individuals moved and acted in ways that reflected their understanding of the shared environment. And within this cohesion, there was also a recognition of individuality, as each person contributed their own patterns of behavior and expression to the overall system of communication, creating a complex interplay between personal identity and collective experience. And as individuals navigated this interplay, they developed a deeper awareness of both themselves and others, understanding how their own actions were perceived and how they fit within the larger context of the Barak. And within this understanding, the role of communication expanded beyond simple interaction, becoming a means of orientation, a way of making sense of the environment and of one's place within it. And as this expanded role took shape, it reinforced the importance of awareness, as individuals relied on their ability to observe, interpret, and respond to subtle signals around them in order to navigate the complexities of daily life. And in this way, the unspoken understanding that characterized communication within the barracks became an essential part of the experience of Birkenau, shaping not only how individuals connected with one another, but also how they engaged with the environment, how they adapted to its demands, and how they maintained a sense of continuity within the shared and ever-present rhythm of life inside the Barak. Chapter 5, Segment 3. Moments of quiet support, subtle acts within the barracks. As the unspoken forms of communication continued to shape the shared experience within the Barracks of Birkenau, another dimension of human connection began to emerge, one that was often even quieter and less visible, yet deeply meaningful within the context of daily life: the presence of subtle acts of support, small gestures that, while easily overlooked from the outside, carried significance for those within the environment. And within a space defined by routine, proximity, and constant awareness of others, these moments of quiet support became part of the fabric of existence, woven into the rhythm of the day in ways that did not disrupt the flow of life, but instead complemented it. And as individuals navigated the constraints of the Barak, they often found themselves responding to the presence of others in ways that reflected a shared understanding of the environment, making small adjustments, offering space where possible, or simply acknowledging the needs of those around them through actions rather than words. And within this process, support was not always expressed through direct or overt means, but through a series of subtle interactions that contributed to the overall balance of the shared space. And as these interactions accumulated, they created an atmosphere in which individuals could rely, in small but meaningful ways, on the presence of others, not through formal structures or expectations, but through the continuous and often instinctive responses that emerged from living in close proximity. And within this atmosphere, even the smallest gesture could carry weight: the way a person shifted to allow another more room, the way a movement was adjusted to avoid disruption, or the way an individual responded to the rhythm of the group, each action contributing to a sense of shared existence that was both collective and personal. And as these moments of quiet support became more integrated into daily life, they helped to shape the experience of the Barak, creating a dynamic in which individuals were not only aware of one another, but also responsive to one another in ways that, while subtle, reinforced the interconnected nature of the environment. And as this interconnectedness deepened, it highlighted the capacity for individuals to adapt to their surroundings by finding ways to coexist that extended beyond mere proximity, creating a form of interaction that was grounded in awareness, consideration, and the recognition of shared experience. And within this context, the Barak was not only a physical space, but also a social environment where the presence of others influenced how individuals moved, acted, and experienced their daily lives. And as these quiet acts of support continued to unfold, they became an integral part of the overall rhythm of life within Birkenau, illustrating how even in a highly structured and collective setting, individuals could contribute to the experience of others in ways that were both subtle and significant. As these understated forms of support continued to shape interactions within the barracks, they also began to influence how individuals perceived the collective nature of their existence, creating a sense of shared participation in the daily rhythm that extended beyond individual experience. And within this shared participation, there was a growing awareness that each person's actions, no matter how small, contributed to the overall atmosphere of the space. And as individuals recognized this, they often engaged with their environment in ways that reflected a balance between personal needs and the needs of others, adjusting their behavior in response to the subtle cues that defined the shared environment. And within this balance, the quiet acts of support that occurred throughout the day became part of a larger pattern, one that reinforced the interconnectedness of those within the Barak. And as this pattern developed, it created a form of continuity that linked individuals together, not through explicit relationships, but through the ongoing process of coexistence and mutual awareness. And within this continuity, individuals often found a sense of orientation, as the predictable presence of others and the consistent patterns of interaction provided a framework through which the experience of daily life could be understood. And as this understanding deepened, the Barak became more than a place of shared occupancy. It became a space where the presence of others was an integral part of how individuals navigated their environment, shaping their actions, their perceptions, and their responses. And within this shared space, the quiet support that existed between individuals contributed to a sense of cohesion, a subtle but persistent connection that underscored the collective nature of life within Birkenau. And as this cohesion continued to develop, it highlighted the ways in which individuals adapted not only to the physical constraints of the Barak, but also to the social dynamics that emerged within it, finding ways to exist together that reflected both the limitations and the possibilities of the environment. And in this way, the moments of quiet support within the barracks became a defining feature of the human experience in Birkenau, illustrating how individuals, through small and often unnoticed actions, contributed to the shared rhythm of life, creating an environment that, while shaped by external structures, was also influenced by the subtle and continuous interactions that connected those who lived within it. Chapter 6, Segment 1. The Psychological Landscape Living Within the Mind. As life inside the Barracks of Birkenau continued to unfold through its repetitive rhythms, structured routines, and shared spaces, there existed another dimension of experience that was not visible in the physical environment, yet deeply influential in shaping how individuals understood their daily existence. The psychological landscape, an internal world formed by thought, perception, memory, and awareness, and within this internal space, individuals navigated their experiences in ways that were both personal and shaped by the environment around them, creating a complex interplay between external reality and internal interpretation. And as individuals adapted to the physical conditions of the Barak, they also began to adapt to the mental and emotional demands of living within such a structured and collective setting, developing ways of processing their experiences that allowed them to maintain a sense of continuity within the ongoing rhythm of daily life. And within this process, the mind became a central space of engagement, a place where individuals could reflect, interpret, and make sense of their surroundings, even when those surroundings were defined by repetition and limitation. And as the days passed, this internal landscape evolved, shaped by the accumulation of experiences, the recognition of patterns, and the awareness of time. And within this evolving landscape, individuals often found themselves moving between different states of awareness, at times focused on the immediate demands of the routine, and at other times engaged in reflection, recalling memories, or considering the passage of time in a broader sense. And as this movement between present awareness and reflection continued, it created a dynamic internal experience that complemented the external structure of the Barak, providing a sense of depth to daily life that extended beyond the physical environment. And within this depth, individuals developed ways of maintaining a sense of identity, drawing on memory and thought as a means of preserving continuity with their past, even as they adapted to the present conditions. And as this connection between past and present was maintained, it contributed to a sense of internal stability, allowing individuals to navigate the repetitive nature of daily life with a degree of mental resilience. And within this resilience, the psychological landscape became a space where individuals could engage with their experiences in ways that were not constrained by the physical limitations of the Barak, creating a form of internal freedom that existed alongside the external structure. And as this internal space continued to develop, it played a crucial role in shaping how individuals perceived their environment, how they responded to the routine, and how they understood their place within the shared experience of Birkenau. And in this way, the psychological dimension of life within the barracks became an essential aspect of the overall experience, illustrating how individuals adapted not only physically, but mentally, to the conditions of their environment, creating an internal landscape that allowed them to navigate the complexities of daily life with awareness, reflection, and continuity. As this psychological landscape became more deeply integrated into the experience of daily life, its influence extended into the ways individuals interacted with both their environment and the people around them, shaping not only their internal perceptions, but also their external behaviors. And within this interaction, the mind served as a mediator between the individual and the collective, allowing each person to interpret the shared experience in a way that was uniquely their own, while still participating in the broader rhythm of the Barak. And as individuals continued to navigate this balance, they developed strategies of thought and awareness that helped them engage with the repetitive nature of the routine, often focusing on the present moment as a way of maintaining clarity, while also drawing on memory and reflection to create a sense of continuity over time. And within this process, the perception of time itself became closely linked to the internal experience, as individuals measured the passage of days not only through external events, but through their own awareness of repetition and change. And as this awareness deepened, it contributed to a more nuanced understanding of daily life, where the external structure of the routine was complemented by an internal sense of progression, shaped by thought, memory, and reflection. And within this understanding, the psychological landscape also provided a space for adaptation, as individuals adjusted their perspectives and responses in ways that allowed them to navigate the challenges of the environment, creating a form of mental flexibility that was essential to their experience. And as this flexibility developed, it influenced how individuals engaged with the collective nature of the Barak, allowing them to maintain a sense of individuality while also participating in the shared rhythm of life. And within this balance, the internal and external dimensions of experience became closely connected, each influencing the other in a continuous process of interaction. And as this process continued over time, the psychological landscape became not only a reflection of the environment, but also a means of shaping how that environment was experienced, providing individuals with a way to interpret, adapt to, and engage with their surroundings in a manner that was both personal and connected to the collective. And in this way, the mental and emotional dimension of life within Birkenau became an integral part of the overall experience, illustrating how individuals, through the development of their internal awareness, were able to navigate the complexities of their environment, maintaining a sense of continuity, identity, and understanding within the ongoing rhythm of life inside the barracks. Chapter 6, Segment 2. Memory and Imagination Holding Onto Another World. As the internal psychological landscape continued to shape the experience of individuals within the Barracks of Birkenau, memory and imagination emerged as two closely connected elements within that inner world, providing a bridge between the present environment and experiences that existed beyond it. And within the rhythm of daily life, where routine and repetition defined the external structure of existence, the mind often moved beyond the immediate surroundings, drawing upon memories of earlier times and places, and through this process, individuals were able to maintain a connection to a world that extended beyond the physical boundaries of the Barak. And as these memories surfaced, they were not always experienced as clear or complete recollections, but often as fragments, impressions, or sensations that carried meaning, creating a layered internal experience in which the past and the present existed simultaneously. And within this layering, individuals could revisit familiar places, recall faces, or reflect on moments that had shaped their sense of identity. And as this act of remembering continued, it contributed to a sense of continuity, allowing individuals to hold on to aspects of themselves that were not defined by the immediate conditions of their environment. And alongside memory, imagination played a complementary role, as the mind not only revisited what had been, but also created possibilities, forming images and scenarios that extended beyond the present moment. And, within this imaginative space, individuals could explore ideas, consider different perspectives, or simply engage in a form of mental movement that contrasted with the physical stillness of the Barak. And as memory and imagination interacted, they created a dynamic internal environment, one that was constantly shifting and evolving, shaped by both recollection and creativity. And within this environment, individuals could find moments of mental distance from their surroundings, not in the sense of escape, but as a way of expanding their awareness beyond the immediate. And as this expansion occurred, it contributed to a more complex understanding of their experience, as the present was no longer the only point of reference, but part of a broader continuum that included both the past and imagined possibilities. And as this continuum became more defined, it influenced how individuals perceived their daily lives, providing a sense of depth and perspective that extended beyond the repetition of routine. And in this way, memory and imagination became essential components of the psychological landscape within the barracks, shaping how individuals engaged with their environment and how they maintained a sense of connection to a larger world beyond the confines of Birkenau. As the interplay between memory and imagination became more deeply embedded in the internal experience of individuals, it began to influence not only their perception of time, but also their sense of identity and continuity, creating a framework through which they could understand their place within both the present moment and the broader narrative of their lives. And within this framework, memory served as a foundation, anchoring individuals to their past experiences, while imagination allowed them to extend beyond that foundation, exploring possibilities and perspectives that added depth to their understanding of the present. And as these two elements worked together, they created a sense of movement within the mind, a dynamic process that contrasted with the physical limitations of the Barak. And within this process, individuals could navigate their internal landscape in ways that were not constrained by the external environment, allowing for moments of reflection, creativity, and mental exploration that contributed to their overall experience. And as this internal movement continued, it also shaped how individuals engaged with the passage of time, as the presence of memory and imagination created a sense of continuity that connected one day to the next, and one phase of life to another. And within this continuity, the repetitive nature of daily routine was placed within a larger context, one that extended beyond the immediate sequence of events and allowed individuals to perceive their experience as part of an ongoing narrative. And as this perception developed, it contributed to a deeper sense of awareness, as individuals were able to recognize both the constancy of their environment and the variability of their internal experience. And within this recognition, there was a form of balance, as the stability of routine was complemented by the fluidity of thought, creating an experience that was both structured and dynamic. And as individuals continued to navigate this balance, the role of memory and imagination remained central, providing a means of engaging with the environment in a way that preserved a sense of individuality and perspective. And in this way, the internal landscape of the barracks was shaped not only by the external conditions of life within Birkenau, but also by the capacity of the mind to recall, to imagine, and to create connections that extended beyond the immediate, illustrating how individuals, through the interplay of memory and imagination, maintained a sense of depth and continuity within the ongoing rhythm of daily life. Chapter 6, Segment 3. Adapting the mind, finding stability within repetition. As the psychological landscape of life within the barracks continued to evolve, shaped by memory, imagination, and the continuous interaction between internal thought and external routine, individuals gradually developed another important aspect of their internal experience: the ability to adapt their minds to the repetition that defined daily life. And within an environment where each day followed a similar structure, where the sequence of events was largely predictable, and where variation was limited, the mind itself began to adjust, creating ways of engaging with repetition that allowed individuals to maintain a sense of balance and continuity. And as this process of mental adaptation unfolded, it did not occur all at once, but gradually, through the accumulation of experience, as individuals became more familiar with the patterns that defined their environment. And within this familiarity, they began to anticipate the flow of the day, recognizing the transitions between different phases and understanding how each moment connected to the next. And as this anticipation developed, it reduced the uncertainty associated with the routine, allowing individuals to navigate their daily lives with a greater sense of awareness. And within this awareness, repetition began to take on a different meaning, no longer experienced solely as a series of identical moments, but as a structured pattern that could be understood, interpreted, and even internalized. And as individuals internalized this pattern, it became part of their mental framework, shaping how they perceived time and how they organized their thoughts. And within this framework, the repetition of daily life provided a form of consistency, a stable backdrop against which internal experience could unfold. And as this stability took shape, individuals often focused their attention on the present moment, engaging with the immediate phase of the routine rather than the entire sequence. And within this focus, the mind found a way to manage the continuity of time, breaking the day into smaller, more manageable segments that could be experienced individually. And as this approach became more established, it contributed to a sense of mental clarity, as individuals were able to align their thoughts with the structure of the routine, reducing the sense of overwhelming continuity and creating a more defined experience of each moment. And within this clarity, the mind adapted not only to the repetition itself, but to the way repetition was experienced, transforming it from a purely external condition into an internalized pattern that could be navigated with awareness and understanding. And as this transformation continued, it played a crucial role in shaping the overall experience of life within the barracks, illustrating how individuals, through the process of mental adaptation, found ways to engage with the repetitive nature of their environment in a manner that supported continuity, awareness, and a sense of internal balance. As this mental adaptation became more deeply integrated into daily life, it began to influence not only how individuals experienced repetition, but also how they related to the passage of time and the continuity of their existence, creating a subtle but important shift in perception, where the repetitive structure of the day was no longer seen as a series of isolated cycles, but as part of a larger, ongoing rhythm that connected each moment to the next. And within this expanded perspective, individuals developed a sense of flow, an understanding that their experience was not confined to individual days, but extended across time in a continuous sequence. And as this sense of flow took shape, it contributed to a more cohesive understanding of daily life, where the repetition of routine was balanced by the awareness of progression. And within this balance, the mind played an active role in shaping how experience was interpreted, allowing individuals to maintain a sense of continuity even within a highly structured environment. And as this process continued, it also influenced how individuals engaged with their surroundings, as the internalized rhythm of the routine provided a framework through which the external environment could be understood, creating a connection between the internal and external aspects of experience that reinforced the overall sense of stability. And within this connection, individuals were able to navigate their environment with a degree of confidence, as the predictability of the routine, combined with their mental adaptation to it, created a consistent and recognizable pattern that guided their actions and perceptions. And as this guidance became more established, it allowed individuals to focus their attention more effectively, aligning their thoughts with the present moment while also maintaining an awareness of the broader sequence of events. And within this alignment, the mind continued to adapt, refining its ability to engage with repetition in a way that supported both clarity and continuity. And as this refinement took place, it contributed to a deeper understanding of the psychological experience of life within the barracks, illustrating how individuals, through the development of mental strategies and adaptive awareness, were able to navigate the complexities of their environment, maintaining a sense of stability and coherence within a setting defined by repetition. And in this way, the process of adapting the mind became an essential part of the overall experience of Birkenau, highlighting the capacity for internal resilience and the ability to find structure and meaning within the ongoing rhythm of daily life. Chapter 7, Segment 1. The Presence of Authority, a Constant Watchfulness. As life within the Barracks of Birkenau continued to unfold through its familiar rhythms of routine, shared space, and internal adaptation, another defining element remained ever present in the background of daily experience: the continuous awareness of authority, a presence that, while not always directly visible at every moment, shaped the environment in profound and lasting ways, influencing how individuals moved, how they behaved, and how they perceived their surroundings. And within this context, authority was not experienced solely through direct interaction, but as a constant and underlying condition, an awareness that extended across both the physical and psychological dimensions of life within the camp. And as individuals navigated the daily routine, this awareness became integrated into their perception of the environment, forming part of the structure through which they understood their place within the broader system. And within the barracks, this presence of authority was reflected, not only in the organization of space and the enforcement of routine, but also in the subtle ways it influenced behavior, as individuals adjusted their actions in response to the expectations and limitations that defined their environment. And as this adjustment became more ingrained, it contributed to a form of attentiveness, a heightened awareness of surroundings that extended beyond immediate needs and into the broader context of the camp. And within this attentiveness, individuals often became attuned to the patterns of oversight, recognizing how authority was expressed through routine, through observation, and through the structure of daily life. And as this recognition developed, it allowed individuals to navigate their environment with a greater sense of awareness, understanding how their actions fit within the larger system and how to move within it in a way that aligned with its expectations. And within this process, the presence of authority became something that was both external and internal, as individuals not only responded to it, but also incorporated an awareness of it into their own perception and behavior, creating a continuous interaction between the individual and the system in which they existed. And as this interaction continued, it shaped the overall atmosphere of the Barak, reinforcing the sense that life within the space was not isolated, but connected to a larger framework of organization and control. And as individuals adapted to this framework, they developed ways of interpreting and responding to the presence of authority, using their awareness to navigate the complexities of daily life. And in his way, the constant watchfulness that defined the environment became an integral part of the experience of Birkenau, influencing not only what individuals did, but how they thought, how they perceived, and how they understood their place within the shared and structured reality of the camp. As this awareness of authority became more deeply embedded in daily life, it began to influence the internal experience of individuals as well, shaping not only their external behavior but also their thoughts, their perceptions, and their understanding of the environment in which they lived. And within this internalization, the presence of authority extended beyond direct observation, becoming part of the mental framework through which individuals interpreted their surroundings. And as this mental framework developed, it contributed to a form of continuous awareness, where individuals remained attentive not only to what was happening around them, but also to how their own actions aligned with the expectations of the system. And within this awareness, there was balance between observation and response, as individuals learned to interpret the environment and adjust accordingly, creating a dynamic interaction that allowed them to navigate the structured nature of daily life with a degree of clarity. And as this interaction continued, it also influenced how individuals related to the concept of space within the Barak, as the shared environment was not only defined by physical proximity, but also by the presence of oversight that extended into every aspect of daily life. And within this context, the Barak became a space where external and internal awareness were closely connected, as individuals engaged with their surroundings through a combination of perception, interpretation, and response. And as this engagement deepened, it contributed to a more nuanced understanding of the environment, where authority was not always directly visible, but consistently felt, shaping the atmosphere and influencing the experience of those within it. And within this atmosphere, individuals developed ways of maintaining a sense of orientation, using their awareness of the system to navigate the routine and to understand the flow of daily life. And as this sense of orientation became more established, it provided a form of continuity, allowing individuals to move through their environment with an understanding of how it functioned and how they fit within it. And in this way, the presence of authority within Birkenau was not only a structural element, but also a psychological one, shaping the internal and external dimensions of experience and reinforcing the interconnected nature of life within the barracks, where every action, every movement, and every moment was influenced by the continuous awareness of a system that defined the boundaries and structure of daily existence. Chapter 7, Segment 2. Guard towers and visibility being seen at all times. As the awareness of authority continued to shape the experience of daily life within Birkenau, this presence was not only felt through routine and internalized perception, but also through the physical structures that defined the camp itself. And among these, the guard towers stood as constant points of observation, positioned at intervals around the perimeter and within sight of the barracks, forming a visual reminder of continuous oversight. And for those living inside the camp, these towers were not simply architectural elements, but integral components of the environment that influenced how space was perceived and how movement was understood. And as individuals moved through their daily routines, the visibility of these structures contributed to a heightened awareness of being seen, creating an environment in which observation was not an occasional occurrence, but a constant condition. And within this condition, the concept of visibility became central to the experience of space, as individuals were aware that their actions, their movements, and their presence existed within a field of view that extended beyond their immediate surroundings. And as this awareness developed, it influenced how individuals navigated both the interior of the barracks and the exterior spaces of the camp, shaping their behavior in ways that aligned with the understanding that they were part of a continuously observed environment. And within this environment, the guard towers functioned as fixed points of perspective, their elevated positions allowing for a broad view of the camp. And as individuals recognized this, they incorporated this understanding into their perception of space, interpreting the layout of the camp not only in terms of physical boundaries, but also in terms of lines of sight and areas of visibility. And as this interpretation became more ingrained, it contributed to a form of spatial awareness that extended beyond immediate surroundings, allowing individuals to understand how different areas of the camp related to one another within the broader framework of observation. And within this expanded awareness, the presence of the towers became part of the mental map through which individuals navigated their environment, shaping not only where they moved, but how they understood their position within the camp. And as this understanding deepened, it reinforced the sense that life within Birkenau existed within a system of continuous visibility, where the boundaries of space were defined not only by physical structures but also by the presence of observation. And in this way, the guard towers played a crucial role in shaping the experience of daily life, contributing to an environment where being seen was not an isolated event, but a constant and defining aspect of existence. As this continuous visibility became more deeply integrated into the experience of daily life, it began to influence not only how individuals perceived their surroundings, but also how they understood themselves within that environment, creating a subtle but persistent awareness of presence that extended beyond physical location and into the realm of perception. And within this awareness, individuals often experienced a heightened sense of self-consciousness, as the knowledge of being observed shaped their actions, their movements, and their interactions with others. And as this self-awareness developed, it contributed to a form of internal adaptation, where individuals adjusted their behavior in response to the environment, aligning themselves with the expectations and limitations that were implied by the constant presence of observation. And within this process, the guard towers, though physically distant, became psychologically close, as their presence was felt not only through sight, but through the awareness they created, influencing how individuals engaged with the space around them. And as this influence continued, it also shaped the collective experience of the barracks, as the shared understanding of visibility contributed to a common perception of the environment, where individuals were connected not only by proximity and routine, but by the knowledge that they existed within the same field of observation. And within this shared perception, there was a form of cohesion, as individuals navigated the environment with a similar awareness, responding to the same conditions and interpreting the same structures in ways that aligned with their experience. And as this cohesion developed, it reinforced the interconnected nature of life within the camp, where individual experience was shaped by collective understanding, and where the presence of observation was a unifying element that influenced how everyone engaged with their surroundings. And as time passed, this continuous visibility became a stable and defining feature of daily life, something that was no longer perceived as separate from the environment, but as an integral part of it, shaping how space was understood, how movement was experienced, and how individuals perceived their place within the broader structure of Birkenau. And in this way, the guard towers and the visibility they represented were not only physical elements of the camp, but also psychological ones, contributing to the overall experience of life within the barracks by creating an environment where being seen was a constant reality, influencing both the external and internal dimensions of existence. Chapter 7, Segment 3. Living under observation, behavior, and awareness. As the constant visibility created by the guard towers and the broader structure of authority became fully integrated into daily life within Birkenau, the experience of living under observation began to shape behavior in subtle yet continuous ways, influencing how individuals moved, how they interacted with their surroundings, and how they understood their own presence within the camp. And within this environment, observation was not experienced as a single act, but as an ongoing condition, something that existed at all times, forming part of the background of daily life. And as individuals adapted to this condition, they developed a heightened awareness of their actions, becoming more attentive to how they positioned themselves within the shared space, how they moved through the barracks, and how they participated in the routines that defined each day. And within this attentiveness, behavior became closely aligned with the expectations of the environment, as individuals adjusted their actions in response to the understanding that they were part of a system in which visibility and oversight were constant. And as this alignment developed, it created a form of behavioral consistency, where actions were guided not only by routine, but by the awareness of observation that accompanied it. And within this consistency, individuals often found themselves engaging with their environment in a measured and deliberate way, focusing on the immediate tasks at hand while maintaining an awareness of the broader context in which those tasks took place. And as this approach became more established, it contributed to a sense of order within daily life, as behavior followed patterns that were both predictable and responsive to the conditions of the environment. And within this order, the presence of observation became a stabilizing element, providing a framework through which individuals could interpret their actions and understand how they fit within the larger system. And as this framework continued to shape behavior, it also influenced how individuals perceived their surroundings, as the awareness of being observed extended into the way space was experienced, creating a connection between physical environment and psychological perception that reinforced the overall structure of life within the camp. And within this connection, individuals navigated their daily routines with a combination of awareness and adaptation, responding to the continuous presence of observation in ways that allowed them to maintain a sense of orientation within the environment. And as this process unfolded over time, it became clear that living under observation was not simply a condition imposed from outside, but an integrated aspect of experience, one that shaped behavior, perception, and understanding in ways that were both subtle and pervasive, influencing every aspect of life within the barracks and contributing to the overall rhythm of existence within Birkenau. As this ongoing condition of observation continued to shape both behavior and perception, it also began to influence the internal experience of individuals, creating a form of awareness that extended beyond immediate actions and into the way individuals understood themselves within the environment. And within this internalization, the presence of observation became part of the psychological landscape, influencing thought processes, self-perception, and the interpretation of daily life. And as individuals navigated this internal dimension, they often developed a heightened sense of attentiveness, not only to their surroundings, but to their own actions and responses, creating a continuous loop of awareness in which external observation and internal reflection were closely connected. And within this loop, individuals engaged with their environment in a way that was both active and reflective, interpreting the conditions around them while also considering how they fit within those conditions. And as this dual awareness developed, it contributed to a more nuanced understanding of daily life, where behavior was not only a response to external expectations, but also a reflection of internal adaptation. And within this understanding, individuals were able to navigate the complexities of their environment with a degree of clarity, recognizing how their actions aligned with the broader structure of the camp and how their internal awareness supported their ability to engage with that structure. And as this clarity became more established, it reinforced the sense of continuity within daily life, as individuals moved through the routine with an understanding of both its external and internal dimensions. And within this continuity, the presence of observation remained a constant factor, shaping not only what individuals did, but how they experienced what they did, creating a connection between action and perception that defined the overall experience of living under observation. And as this connection continued to evolve, it highlighted the intricate relationship between environment and awareness, illustrating how the conditions of life within Birkenau influenced not only the physical aspects of existence, but also the mental and emotional dimensions, shaping a comprehensive experience in which observation, behavior, and perception were deeply interconnected. And in this way, the experience of living under observation became an essential part of the broader narrative of life within the barracks, reflecting the ways in which individuals adapted to their environment and developed a continuous awareness that guided their actions and shaped their understanding of the world around them. Chapter 8, Segment 1. The Environment Beyond the Barracks, the Wider Camp. As life within the Barracks of Birkenau unfolded through its routines, shared spaces, and internal adaptations, the experience of daily existence was not limited to the interior of those structures alone, but extended outward into the broader environment of the camp itself, a landscape that, while interconnected with the barracks, possessed its own distinct characteristics, rhythms, and spatial meanings. And for those living within the barracks, the transition from the interior space to the exterior environment was a recurring part of the daily routine, one that connected the confined and shared space of the barack to the wider and more expansive layout of the camp. And within this transition, individuals encountered a different sense of space, one defined not by close proximity and enclosed structure, but by openness, distance, and the arrangement of various elements across the landscape. And as individuals moved through this environment, they developed an understanding of its layout, recognizing the paths, the boundaries, and the relationships between different areas. And within this understanding, the camp became more than a collection of structures. It became a spatial system, a network of locations and connections that shaped how individuals navigated their daily lives. And as this spatial awareness developed, it influenced how individuals perceived distance and movement, as the experience of walking through the camp created a sense of scale that contrasted with the confined nature of the barracks, and within this contrast, the exterior environment offered a different perspective, one that allowed individuals to see the broader context of their surroundings, even as they remained within the boundaries of the camp. And as individuals engaged with this environment over time, they began to recognize patterns within it, understanding how different areas were used, how movement flowed between them, and how the overall structure of the camp contributed to the organization of daily life. And within this recognition, the environment beyond the barracks became an integral part of the experience of Birkenau, shaping not only how individuals moved through space, but also how they understood their place within the larger system. And as this understanding deepened, it created a connection between the interior and exterior aspects of daily life, linking the shared space of the barracks with the wider landscape of the camp. And as individuals continued to navigate this connection, they developed a comprehensive awareness of their environment, one that encompassed both the immediate and the expansive. And in this way, the broader camp became an essential extension of life within the barracks, contributing to the overall experience of Birkenau by providing a spatial context that shaped movement, perception, and understanding. As this awareness of the wider camp environment became more established, it also began to influence how individuals experienced the passage of time and the rhythm of daily life, as the movement between the barracks and the exterior spaces created a sense of transition that marked different phases of the day. And within these transitions, individuals were able to perceive the routine not only as a sequence of actions, but as a series of spatial movements, where each part of the day was associated with a particular area of the camp. And as this association developed, it contributed to a more structured understanding of daily life, where time and space were closely connected. And within this connection, individuals could anticipate the flow of the day based on their movement through the environment, recognizing how one location led to another and how each transition fit within the broader pattern of the routine. And as this spatial temporal awareness deepened, it also influenced how individuals engaged with their surroundings, as the familiarity of the environment allowed them to navigate it with increasing confidence and clarity, understanding not only where they were, but how their position related to the overall structure of the camp. And within this understanding, the wider environment became a reference point for orientation, providing a framework through which individuals could interpret their experience and maintain a sense of continuity within the repetitive nature of daily life. And as this framework continued to shape perception, it also contributed to the development of a mental map, an internal representation of the camp that allowed individuals to visualize its layout and to understand the relationships between different areas. And within this mental map, the barracks were not isolated spaces but part of a larger system, connected to the broader environment in ways that influenced how individuals experienced both. And as this integrated awareness evolved, it reinforced the idea that life within Birkenau was defined not only by the conditions within the barracks, but also by structure and organization of the camp as a whole. And in this way, the environment beyond the barracks became an essential part of the overall experience, shaping how individuals perceived space, time, and movement, and contributing to a comprehensive understanding of life within the camp, where each element, whether interior or exterior, played a role in defining the rhythm and structure of daily existence. Chapter 8, Segment 2. Movement through the camp, paths, routes, and transitions. As individuals continued to move between the barracks and the wider environment of Birkenau, the act of movement itself became a defining element of daily life, shaping not only how space was experienced, but also how time and routine were understood. And within this environment, movement was rarely random or unstructured, but instead followed established paths and routes that connected different areas of the camp, creating a network of movement that guided the flow of daily activity. And as individuals engaged with this network, they developed an awareness of its patterns, recognizing how certain routes were used at specific times, how movement shifted throughout the day, and how these patterns contributed to the overall rhythm of the camp. And within this awareness, The act of walking from one place to another became more than a simple transition. It became part of the routine itself, a repeated experience that reinforced the structure of daily life. And as individuals followed these routes, they became familiar with the physical characteristics of the environment, the layout of the ground, the positioning of structures, and the spatial relationships that defined the camp. And within this familiarity, movement became more intuitive, as individuals no longer needed to consciously navigate each step, but could instead move with a sense of direction that was shaped by repeated experience. And as this intuitive understanding developed, it contributed to a sense of continuity, as each journey through the camp mirrored previous ones, creating a pattern of movement that connected different moments of the day. And within this pattern, individuals began to perceive the camp not as a static space, but as a dynamic environment, one that was constantly in motion, shaped by the collective movement of within it. And as this perception deepened, it influenced how individuals understood their place within the environment, as they recognized that their own movement was part of a larger flow, a continuous process that linked them to others and to the broader structure of the camp. And within this process, transitions between spaces took on particular significance, as each movement from one area to another marked a shift in activity, in perspective, and in experience. And as individuals became more attuned to these transitions, they began to interpret them as markers of time, using movement as a way of understanding the progression of the day. And in this way, the paths and routes of Birkenau became more than physical features. They became integral components of the daily routine, shaping how individuals moved, how they perceived space, and how they experienced the continuous flow of life within the camp. As this structured movement through the camp became more deeply embedded in daily life, it also began to influence the internal experience of individuals, shaping how they perceive transitions not only in space, but also in time and awareness. And within this influence, movement became a bridge between different phases of the day, connecting the interior of the barracks with the exterior environment and linking one activity to the next in a continuous sequence. And as individuals moved along familiar routes, they often developed a sense of anticipation, recognizing the patterns of the routine and understanding what each transition signified within the broader context of daily life. And within this anticipation, movement took on a temporal dimension, as the act of walking became associated with the progression of time, allowing individuals to measure the day through the sequence of their movements. And as this temporal awareness developed, it contributed to a more integrated understanding of daily life, where time and space were experienced together, each reinforcing the other in a continuous cycle. And within this cycle, the repetition of movement created a sense of rhythm, a predictable pattern that provided a form of structure within the broader environment. And as individuals adapted to this rhythm, they were able to navigate their surroundings with a greater sense of clarity, understanding not only where they were going, but how each movement fit within the larger sequence of events. And within this understanding, the experience of movement became both practical and perceptual, serving as a means of navigating the environment while also shaping how that environment was experienced. And as this dual role continued to influence daily life, it reinforced the interconnected nature of the camp, where each path, each route, and each transition contributed to the overall structure of existence. And as individuals moved through this interconnected system, they became part of the ongoing flow that defined the camp, their movements linking different spaces, different times, and different experiences into a cohesive whole. And in this way, the act of moving through Birkenau became an essential aspect of life within the camp, illustrating how the physical and perceptual dimensions of movement combined to shape the experience of space, time, and routine, and how individuals, through repeated engagement with the environment, developed a deep and integrated understanding of the paths and transitions that define their daily lives. Chapter 8, Segment 3. The boundaries of the camp, edges, fences, and limits. As individuals continued to move through the wider environment of Birkenau, becoming familiar with its paths, routes, and transitions, another defining feature of the camp gradually became more central to their perception of space. The boundaries that enclosed it, the edges that marked where movement ended and limitation began, and within this context, the concept of boundary was not simply a physical line, but a defining element of the environment, shaping how individuals understood both the space they occupied and the limits of that space, and as individuals navigated the camp, these boundaries were encountered not as distant or abstract ideas, but as visible and continuous structures, forming the perimeter of the environment and creating a clear distinction between the interior of the camp and the world beyond it. And within this distinction, the presence of fences and defined edges contributed to a sense of enclosure, an awareness that the camp was a contained space, separated from its surroundings by barriers that were both physical and perceptual. And as this awareness developed, it influenced how individuals experienced movement, as the knowledge of these limits shaped their understanding of where they could go and how they could navigate the environment. And within this understanding, the boundaries of the camp became part of the mental map that individuals constructed, integrated into their perception of space alongside the paths and structures that defined the interior. And as this mental map evolved, it provided a framework through which individuals could interpret their environment, recognizing not only the areas within the camp, but also the edges that defined its extent. And within this framework, the boundaries took on a dual role, functioning both as physical limits and as reference points that contributed to orientation, allowing individuals to understand their position within the camp in relation to its edges. And as individuals engaged with this understanding, over time, they developed a familiarity with the layout of the boundaries, recognizing how they extended across the landscape and how they connected with other elements of the environment. And within this familiarity, the boundaries became a constant presence, something that was always there, shaping the experience of space even when not directly in focus. And as this presence continued to influence perception, it reinforced the idea that the camp was a defined and enclosed system, where every movement and every location existed within a clearly marked framework. And in this way, the edges and limits of Birkenau became an essential part of the overall experience, shaping how individuals understood their environment and how they navigated the relationship between space, movement, and limitation within the camp. As this awareness of boundaries became more deeply integrated into daily life, it also began to influence the internal experience of individuals, shaping not only how they perceived space, but also how they understood the concept of limitation within the broader context of their existence. And within this internalization, the physical boundaries of the camp were mirrored by a perceptual understanding of limits, as individuals incorporated the presence of edges and fences into their mental framework, recognizing that their experience of space was defined by these constraints. And as this recognition developed, it contributed to a form of spatial awareness that was both external and internal, where the boundaries of the environment were not only seen, but also understood as part of the structure of daily life. And within this understanding, individuals often interpreted their movement and their position within the camp in relation to these limits, using the boundaries as reference points that provided a sense of orientation. And as this orientation became more established, it created a stable framework through which the environment could be understood, allowing individuals to navigate their surroundings with a sense of clarity, even within a space defined by constraint. And within this clarity, the boundaries also contributed to the perception of the camp as a cohesive system, where each element, from the barracks to the paths to the perimeter, was interconnected and part of a larger structure. And as individuals engaged with this system, they developed a comprehensive understanding of how the different components of the camp related to one another, and how the boundaries defined the overall shape and extent of the environment. And within this comprehensive understanding, the concept of limit became an integral part of experience, shaping how individuals perceived not only space, but also the passage of time and the rhythm of daily life, as the repetitive nature of the routine unfolded within a fixed and enclosed setting. And as this perception continued to evolve, it reinforced the interconnected nature of physical and psychological experience, illustrating how the boundaries of the camp influenced both the external and internal dimensions of life within Birkenau. And in this way, the edges, fences, and limits of the camp became more than structural elements. They became defining aspects of the experience, shaping how individuals understood their environment, how they navigated its spaces, and how they perceived their place within a world that was clearly bounded, yet continuously experienced through movement, awareness, and adaptation. Chapter 9, Segment 1. The Passage of Time, Days that Blended Together. As individuals continued to live within the structured environment of Birkenau, moving through its barracks, its pathways, and its defined boundaries, another dimension of experience gradually became more pronounced: the perception of time itself, and within the repetitive rhythm of daily life, where routines followed one another with a consistent and often unchanging pattern, the passage of time began to take on a unique and complex character, one that was shaped not by distinct events, but by continuity, and as days unfolded in a similar sequence, marked by the same transitions from morning to evening and back again, individuals often experienced time not as a series of clearly separated moments, but as a continuous flow in which the distinctions between individual days became less defined, and within this flow, the concept of a single day began to merge with the next, creating an experience in which time was perceived as an ongoing cycle rather than a collection of separate units. And, as this perception developed, it influenced how individuals understood the progression of their lives within the camp, as the repetition of routine created a sense of sameness that made it difficult to distinguish one day from another, and within this sameness, time seemed to move in a steady and unbroken line, without the markers that might otherwise define its passage, and as individuals engaged with this continuous flow, they often relied on internal awareness to interpret the passage of time, recognizing subtle changes in their experience, in their thoughts, or in their perception of the routine as indicators of progression, and within this internal awareness, time became something that was felt rather than measured, experienced through the accumulation of moments rather than through external markers, and as this experience deepened, it contributed to a sense of temporal continuity, where the repetition of daily life created a stable framework within which time could be understood, even as its individual components became less distinct. And within this framework, individuals developed a different relationship with time, one that was less focused on specific dates or durations, and more oriented toward the ongoing rhythm of the routine. And as this orientation became more established, it shaped how individuals engaged with their environment, as the repetition of daily life provided a consistent backdrop against which their internal experience could unfold. And in his way, the passage of time within Birkenau became an integral part of the overall experience, defined not by variation, but by continuity, and by the gradual blending of days into a single, ongoing flow that shaped how individuals perceived their existence within the camp. As this continuous perception of time became more deeply embedded in daily life, it also began to influence the internal experience of individuals, shaping how they understood not only the present moment, but also their connection to the past and their awareness of the future. And within this internal dimension, the blending of days created a sense of temporal fluidity, where the boundaries between different points in time became less rigid, allowing individuals to experience their lives as part of an ongoing sequence rather than as a series of isolated moments. And as this fluidity developed, it contributed to a more integrated understanding of time, where the repetition of routine provided a stable structure, while the internal experience of that routine allowed for variation and reflection. And within this balance, individuals often found themselves focusing on the immediate present, engaging with the current phase of the day as a way of maintaining clarity within the broader flow of time. And as this focus on the present became more pronounced, it created a form of temporal awareness that was centered on the here and now, while still connected to the larger sequence of daily life. And within this awareness, the passage of time was experienced not as something that needed to be tracked or measured, but as something that unfolded naturally through the repetition of routine. And as this understanding became more established, it influenced how individuals related to their environment, as the predictability of daily life provided a framework through which time could be experienced with a degree of stability, even as its individual components became less distinct. And within this framework, individuals were able to maintain a sense of continuity, recognizing that each day, though similar to the last, was part of a larger progression that extended beyond the immediate moment. And as this sense of progression developed, it contributed to a deeper understanding of the relationship between time and experience, illustrating how the repetitive nature of daily life within Birkenau shaped not only the external structure of existence, but also the internal perception of time, and in his way, the blending of days into a continuous flow became a defining feature of life within the camp, influencing how individuals perceived their past, engaged with their present, and understood the ongoing rhythm of their existence within a structured and repetitive environment. Chapter 9, Segment 2. Marking Time Without Clocks, Internal Measures of the Day. As the experience of time within Birkenau continued to unfold through repetition and continuity, another layer of temporal awareness began to emerge, shaped not by external instruments such as clocks or calendars, but by internal and environmental cues that allowed individuals to interpret the passage of the day in more subtle ways, and within an environment where traditional markers of time were not always present or emphasized. Individuals developed alternative methods of understanding progression, relying on the sequence of routine, the changes in light, the shifts in sound, and their own internal sense of awareness to orient themselves within the day. And as these methods became more established, they formed a kind of internal system of timekeeping, one that was closely connected to the rhythms of daily life and the structure of the environment. And within this system, the beginning of the day was not defined by a specific hour, but by the gradual transition from night to morning, the subtle increase in light, the change in activity within the barracks, and the collective movement that signaled the start of the routine. And as individuals became attuned to these cues, they learned to recognize the early stages of the day through observation and experience, developing a sensitivity to the environment that allowed them to interpret time without the need for formal measurement. And as the day progressed, this sensitivity continued to guide their understanding, as each phase of the routine was associated with a particular set of conditions, a certain quality of light, a pattern of movement, or a shift in the atmosphere of the camp. And within this association, individuals could anticipate the progression of the day, recognizing where they were within the sequence and what was likely to follow, and as this anticipatory awareness developed, it contributed to a sense of temporal orientation, allowing individuals to navigate the day with a degree of clarity even in the absence of conventional timekeeping. And within this clarity, the passage of time became something that was experienced through the environment itself, as the changing conditions of the camp provided continuous feedback about the progression of the day, and as individuals engaged with this feedback, they developed an internal sense of timing that was closely aligned with the external rhythm of the routine, creating a connection between perception and environment that shaped how time was understood. And as this connection deepened, it reinforced the idea that time within Birkenau was not defined solely by external measures, but by the interaction between internal awareness and environmental cues. And in this way, the experience of marking time without clocks became an essential part of daily life, illustrating how individuals adapted to their surroundings by developing alternative ways of understanding the passage of time within a structured and repetitive environment. As this internal system of timekeeping became more deeply integrated into the experience of daily life, it began to influence not only how individuals understood the progression of the day, but also how they engaged with the broader concept of time itself, creating a more fluid and adaptive perception that was shaped by both internal awareness and external conditions. And within this adaptive perception, individuals often relied on patterns and repetition as primary indicators of time, recognizing that each sequence of events, each transition between phases of the day, contributed to a larger understanding of temporal flow. And as this recognition developed, it allowed individuals to maintain a sense of continuity, even as the distinction between individual moments remained subtle. And within this continuity, the absence of formal timekeeping did not result in disorientation, but rather encouraged the development of a more intuitive understanding of time, one that was based on experience rather than measurement. And as individuals continued to engage with this intuitive system, they became increasingly skilled at interpreting the cues around them, using their awareness of the environment to anticipate changes and to align their actions with the rhythm of the routine. And within this alignment, time became something that was lived rather than tracked, experienced through participation in the daily cycle rather than through observation of external markers, and as this lived experience of time continued to evolve, it also influenced how individuals perceived duration, as the repetition of routine created a sense of consistency that could make periods of time feel both extended and condensed, depending on how they were experienced internally, and within this perception, time was no longer a fixed quantity, but a dynamic experience that varied according to awareness, engagement, and the structure of daily life, and as individuals navigated this dynamic experience, they developed a deeper understanding of the relationship between time and perception, recognizing that the passage of time was not only determined by external factors, but also by the way it was experienced within the mind, and in this way, the process of marking time without clocks became more than a practical adaptation. It became a defining aspect of the psychological experience of life within Birkenau, illustrating how individuals, through their interaction with the environment and their internal awareness, were able to create a coherent and meaningful understanding of time within a setting where traditional measures were absent, and how this understanding contributed to their overall experience of continuity, rhythm, and existence within the camp. Chapter 9, Segment 3. Waiting and Uncertainty, the Feeling of Time. As the experience of time within Birkenau continued to be shaped by repetition, internal awareness, and the absence of conventional measures, another dimension of temporal perception became increasingly significant: the experience of waiting, and within the structured rhythm of daily life, waiting was not always defined by a single moment or event, but existed as an underlying condition that influenced how individuals perceived the passage of time, creating a sense of uncertainty that was woven into the fabric of daily experience. And as individuals moved through the routine, there were periods where the flow of activity slowed or paused, moments that were not defined by specific tasks, but by the anticipation of what would come next. And within these moments, time often felt different, as the lack of immediate action created a heightened awareness of duration, making each moment more noticeable. And as this awareness developed, waiting became a distinct aspect of temporal experience, one that contrasted with the more structured and predictable phases of the day. And within this contrast, individuals often found themselves navigating a complex relationship with time, as the repetition of routine provided a sense of continuity, while the presence of waiting introduced an element of uncertainty, creating a dynamic interplay between predictability and the unknown. And as this interplay unfolded, it influenced how individuals engaged with the present moment, as the anticipation of future events, even when those events were part of a familiar sequence, could shape the perception of time, making it feel slower or more extended. And within this extended perception, individuals often became more aware of their surroundings, as the reduced pace of activity allowed for a greater focus on the environment, on the subtle changes in light, sound, and movement that marked the progression of the day. And as this focus intensified, waiting became not only a temporal experience, but also a perceptual one, shaping how individuals interacted with their environment and how they interpreted the passage of time. And within this interpretation, the concept of uncertainty played a central role, as the absence of clear markers or immediate action created a sense of openness in time, where the future was anticipated but not fully defined. And as individuals adapted to this uncertainty, they developed ways of engaging with it, often by focusing on the present moment or by relying on their internal sense of timing to navigate the flow of the day. And as this adaptation continued, it contributed to a deeper understanding of the relationship between time and experience, illustrating how waiting and uncertainty were not separate from the daily routine, but integral components of it, shaping how individuals perceived the passage of time and how they engaged with the ongoing rhythm of life within Birkenau. As the experience of waiting became more deeply integrated into daily life, it also began to influence the internal perception of time in more profound ways, shaping not only how individuals experienced individual moments, but also how they understood duration and progression within the broader context of their lives. And within this internal dimension, waiting often created a sense of temporal expansion, where moments felt extended and more pronounced, as the absence of immediate activity allowed for a heightened awareness of the present, and as this awareness developed, individuals often found themselves engaging more deeply with their thoughts, their surroundings, and their internal sense of time, creating a form of reflection that was closely tied to the experience of waiting. And within this reflection, the passage of time could be perceived in different ways, sometimes feeling prolonged, as each moment was experienced in detail, and at other times blending into the broader flow of the day, creating a complex and variable perception that was shaped by both internal and external factors. And as individuals navigated this variability, they developed a more nuanced understanding of time, recognizing that its experience was not fixed, but influenced by attention, awareness, and the structure of the environment. And within this understanding, waiting became a space of interpretation, a moment where individuals could engage with time in a more conscious way, observing its passage and reflecting on its meaning within the context of their daily lives. And as this engagement continued, it also contributed to a sense of continuity, as the repeated experience of waiting, combined with the predictable structure of the routine, created a pattern that connected different moments of the day, linking them together in a cohesive sequence. And within this sequence, individuals were able to maintain a sense of orientation, understanding how each phase of the day related to the next, even as the experience of waiting introduced elements of uncertainty. And as this balance between certainty and uncertainty became more established, it shaped the overall perception of time within Birkenau, illustrating how the experience of waiting, far from being a passive state, was an active and influential aspect of daily life, one that contributed to the complexity of temporal perception and reinforced the interconnected nature of time, awareness, and experience within the camp. And in this way, waiting and uncertainty became defining features of how time was felt and understood, adding depth to the ongoing rhythm of life and shaping the internal experience of those who lived within the structured yet variable flow of daily existence. Chapter 10, Segment 1. The meaning of routine structure within experience. As the experience of life within Birkenau unfolded through its repeated cycles of movement, observation, shared space, and internal adaptation, the concept of routine emerged not only as a structural element of daily life, but as something that carried deeper significance in shaping how individuals understood their environment and their place within it. And within this context, routine was not simply a sequence of actions performed each day, but a framework that connected time, space, and behavior into a cohesive pattern, creating a sense of order within an otherwise complex and continuously unfolding experience. And as individuals engaged with this pattern over time, they began to recognize that routine provided a form of continuity, a consistent structure that allowed them to anticipate the flow of the day and to orient themselves within it. And within this orientation, the repetition of daily activities became more than a series of identical moments. It became a familiar rhythm, one that could be understood, interpreted, and internalized. And as this internalization took place, individuals developed a deeper awareness of how the different phases of the day were connected, recognizing that each part of the routine contributed to the overall structure of their experience. And within this recognition, routine began to take on a meaning that extended beyond its practical function, becoming a central aspect of how individuals perceive time, space, and movement within the camp. And as this perception developed, it influenced how individuals engaged with their environment, as the predictability of routine provided a stable reference point against which the variability of internal experience could unfold. And within this stability, individuals were able to maintain a sense of continuity, even as their thoughts, perceptions, and awareness shifted from moment to moment. And as this balance between stability and variability became more established, it contributed to a more nuanced understanding of daily life, where routine was seen not as a limitation, but as a structure that supported the ongoing experience of existence within the camp. And within this understanding, individuals often found themselves engaging with routine in a way that was both conscious and intuitive, recognizing its patterns while also responding to its demands in a natural and adaptive manner. And as this engagement continued, it reinforced the interconnected nature of daily life, where each action, each movement, and each transition was part of a larger sequence that defined the rhythm of existence. And in this way, the meaning of routine within Birkenau became an essential aspect of the overall experience, illustrating how structure and repetition, when internalized and understood, could shape not only the external organization of life, but also the internal perception of time, space, and continuity. As this deeper understanding of routine continued to evolve, it also began to influence the internal experience of individuals in more subtle ways, shaping how they interpreted their daily lives and how they related to the ongoing flow of time and activity within the camp. And within this internal dimension, routine provided more than just predictability. It offered a framework through which individuals could organize their thoughts, align their awareness, and engage with their environment in a structured and coherent way. And as individuals became more familiar with the patterns of routine, they often developed a sense of anticipation, recognizing the sequence of events that would unfold and preparing themselves for each phase of the day. And within this anticipation, routine became a guide, a reference point that allowed individuals to navigate their experience with a degree of clarity, even in the absence of external markers of time or variation in daily activity. And as this clarity developed, it contributed to a sense of orientation, as individuals were able to understand not only where they were within the day, but how their current experience related to the broader sequence of events. And within this orientation, routine also played a role in shaping the perception of continuity, as the repetition of daily patterns created a connection between past, present, and future, linking each moment to the ones that had come before and theons that would follow. And as this connection became more established, it reinforced the sense that daily life, while repetitive, was part of a larger and ongoing process, one that extended beyond individual moments and created a cohesive narrative of experience. And within this narrative, routine served as both structure and meaning, providing a consistent framework that allowed individuals to interpret their environment and to engage with it in a way that was both adaptive and aware. And as this engagement continued, it highlighted the role of routine as a central element of life within Birkenau, illustrating how the repetition of daily actions, when understood and internalized, could contribute to a sense of stability, continuity, and orientation within a complex and structured environment. And in this way, the meaning of routine became not only a reflection of the external organization of the camp, but also a key component of the internal experience of those who lived within it, shaping how they perceived their surroundings, how they navigated their daily lives, and how they understood the ongoing rhythm of existence within the barracks and beyond. Chapter 10, Segment 2. Continuity and Change, the Subtle Differences Between Days. As the meaning of routine became more deeply understood within the experience of life in Birkenau, another layer of awareness gradually emerged, one that existed within the structure of repetition itself. The recognition that even within a highly consistent and predictable routine, not all days were entirely identical, and within this realization, individuals began to perceive the subtle differences that distinguished one day from another, differences that were not always immediately visible, but could be felt through changes in atmosphere, perception, and internal experience. And as individuals moved through the familiar sequence of daily life, they often encountered moments that, while part of the same routine, carried a slightly different quality, shaped by variations in light, in sound, in the movement of others, or in their own state of awareness. And within these variations, the experience of daily life became more complex, as the repetition of routine was balanced by the presence of change, creating a dynamic interplay between consistency and difference that shaped how time and experience were understood. And as this interplay developed, individuals began to recognize that the routine itself provided a stable framework, while the variations within it added depth and nuance to their experience, allowing them to perceive each day not only as part of a continuous sequence, but also as a distinct moment within that sequence. And within this perception, even small changes could take on significance, as they provided points of contrast within the broader pattern of repetition, helping individuals to differentiate one day from another. And as this differentiation became more apparent, it contributed to a more layered understanding of time, where continuity and change existed together, each influencing the perception of the other. And within this layered understanding, individuals often became more attentive to their surroundings, noticing details that might otherwise have gone unnoticed, and as this attentiveness increased, it allowed them to engage more fully with the present moment, recognizing how the current experience differed, even slightly, from previous ones, and within this engagement, the routine of daily life took on a new dimension, as it was no longer experienced solely as repetition, but as a structure within which variation could occur, creating a balance between familiarity and difference that shaped the overall experience of life within the camp. And as this balance continued to influence perception, it reinforced the idea that continuity did not eliminate change, but rather provided a context within which change could be understood. And in this way, the subtle differences between days became an important aspect of the experience of Birkenau, illustrating how individuals, even within a highly structured environment, could perceive variation and use it to create a more nuanced understanding of time, routine, and daily existence. As this awareness of subtle variation within routine became more deeply integrated into the internal experience of individuals, it also began to influence how they related to the passage of time and the continuity of their lives, creating a more dynamic and reflective perception that balanced repetition with change. And within this perception, individuals often found themselves engaging with their environment in a more attentive and observant manner, recognizing that even within the predictable flow of daily life, there were moments of difference that could be observed, interpreted, and understood, and as this engagement developed, it contributed to a sense of presence, as individuals became more focused on the immediate experience of each day, rather than viewing time solely as a continuous sequence. And within this focus, the subtle variations between days provided a way of anchoring experience in the present, allowing individuals to perceive their lives as a series of connected yet distinct moments. And as this perception became more established, it also influenced how individuals understood their own internal experience, as changes in thought, mood, and awareness contributed to the sense that each day, while structured by routine, carried its own unique qualities. And within this internal variation, individuals could recognize their own role in shaping their experience, understanding that their perception of the day was influenced not only by external conditions, but also by their internal state. And as this understanding deepened, it created a more integrated sense of experience, where the external structure of routine and the internal experience of variation worked together to shape how time was perceived and lived. And within this integration, individuals developed a more nuanced relationship with daily life, one that acknowledged both the stability provided by repetition and the richness added by subtle change. And as this relationship continued to evolve, it reinforced the interconnected nature of time, perception, and experience, illustrating how even within a highly structured environment, individuals could find complexity and depth in the subtle differences that distinguished one day from another. And in this way, the interplay between continuity and change became a defining feature of life within Birkenau, shaping how individuals understood their environment, how they engaged with the passage of time, and how they experienced the ongoing rhythm of their daily existence within the camp. Chapter 10, Segment 3. Memory and Reflection: How Experience Was Carried Forward. As the structured rhythm of daily life in Birkenau continued to shape the experience of those who lived within it, another dimension gradually became more prominent, one that extended beyond the immediate present and into the unfolding continuity of thought and awareness, the role of memory and reflection in carrying experience forward. And within this dimension, individuals did not simply move from one moment to the next in isolation, but instead began to connect their experiences across time, forming a sense of continuity that linked past moments with the present. And as this connection developed, memory became an essential part of how individuals understood their environment and their place within it, serving not only as a record of what had been experienced, but also as a framework through which current experiences could be interpreted. And within this framework, individuals often found themselves recalling previous days, previous moments, and previous interactions, using these recollections to make sense of the present. And as this process of reflection continued, it created a layered understanding of experience, where each new moment was informed by those that had come before. And within this layering, the perception of time became more complex, as individuals were able to hold both the present and the past within their awareness, creating a sense of continuity that extended beyond the immediate flow of daily routine. And as this continuity became more established, it also influenced how individuals engaged with their environment, as their actions and perceptions were shaped not only by what was happening in the moment, but also by what they remembered. And within this interplay between memory and present experience, individuals developed a deeper sense of orientation, one that allowed them to navigate their daily lives with a greater awareness of context and connection. And as this awareness grew, it contributed to a more cohesive understanding of life within the camp, where each day was not an isolated experience, but part of an ongoing narrative that unfolded over time. And within this narrative, reflection played a crucial role, as individuals revisited their experiences, considered their meaning, and integrated them into their broader understanding of existence. And as this integration took place, it reinforced the sense that life within Birkenau, while structured by routine and shaped by external conditions, was also defined by an internal continuity of thought and awareness, one that allowed individuals to carry their experiences forward, connecting the past with the present in a way that created a more complete and nuanced perception of their lives. And in this way, memory and reflection became essential elements of the experience, shaping not only how individuals understood their environment, but also how they understood themselves within it. As this process of memory and reflection continued to develop, it also began to influence how individuals related to the future, creating a sense of temporal continuity that extended beyond the immediate present and into the unfolding progression of time. And within this expanded perception, individuals often found themselves considering not only what had already been experienced, but also how their current experiences might be remembered and understood in the future. And as this forward-looking awareness emerged, it added another layer to the experience of daily life, one that connected past, present, and future into a cohesive and interconnected whole. And within this connection, reflection became both retrospective and anticipatory, allowing individuals to engage with their experiences in a way that was both grounded in memory and oriented toward what lay ahead. And as this dual orientation became more established, it contributed to a deeper sense of continuity, as individuals were able to perceive their lives as part of an ongoing process, one that unfolded over time and was shaped by both past experiences and present awareness. And within this process, memory served not only as a means of recalling what had been, but also as a tool for understanding how experiences accumulated and evolved, creating a sense of progression that added depth to the perception of time. And as this depth became more apparent, it reinforced the idea that even within a highly structured and repetitive environment, life was not static, but dynamic, shaped by the continuous interplay between experience, memory, and reflection. And within this dynamic, individuals often developed a more nuanced understanding of their own awareness, recognizing how their perceptions changed over time and how their understanding of their environment evolved as they accumulated experience. And as this recognition grew, it contributed to a more reflective engagement with daily life, where each moment was not only experienced but also considered in relation to the broader narrative of existence. And within this broader narrative, memory and reflection played a central role, allowing individuals to maintain a sense of continuity, coherence, and meaning, even as the external structure of life remained consistent. And in this way, the experience of Birkenau was shaped not only by the immediate realities of daily life, but also by the ongoing process of remembering, reflecting, and integrating those experiences into a larger understanding of time, self, and existence. And as we come to the end of this journey, what remains is not just a sequence of events, but a deeper understanding of how time, memory, and human experience intertwined within one of history's most complex and haunting places. Each chapter we explored was not just about what happened, but about how it was lived, remembered, and carried forward. If this documentary gave you a new perspective or helped you understand history in a more meaningful way, consider supporting the channel. Your support allows these stories to be told with the depth and care they deserve. Subscribe and join us as we continue to uncover the story's history left behind.